I have an update about our household Alexa situation.
Oh, is this for everyone or just for the two of us? Are we live?
Oh, we're live.
Okay.
It's for every device that responds to that trigger word that you just
apparently.
said. I decided to finally not say hey everybody, we're live, and started with that because it's very the first thing I do when so after we record the show, first thing I do usually I upload the bootleg while we are still talking off the air, if we're doing scheduling discussions or whatever, because I want to get the bootleg up as fast as possible for the members. So normally I will upload the bootleg in the browser with the drag and drop thing while we're still talking. And I think it's the right file because, I have a system that has made it the right file every time. But because I haven't actually listened to it yet, I want to make sure, before I go to bed that night, because, we record at night. Usually I go to bed right afterwards, basically. I'm in Casey's sleepy shirt. And
Nice.
Anyway, normally I have to, my final task for the night, after I, close up the studio, leave, turn the lights off, my final task for the night is to empty the dog before bed. And so I bring him outside, and while I'm doing that, I open up my Overcast app on my phone, and I look for the bootleg that was released 10 minutes earlier, whatever it was, and I hit play and just make sure that it's the right episode. But because all of them begin with, "Hi, everybody, we're live," it's hard for me to really know whether it's the right one or not until, at least a few seconds in. So I was trying to save myself a few seconds of uncertainty and time later tonight by beginning this one with something else.
I see. Well, it's funny you say that because I don't know if the two of you have noticed, and I promised myself I wouldn't call attention to it, but here we are. I have been trying for the last several weeks to have some sort of I don't want to say icebreaker because that has all the terrible connotations of awkward corporate gatherings, but some sort of fun question, sort of kind of in the spirit of Snell Talk at the beginning of Upgrade, but just some sort of fun question that I come up with that I can ask the two of you each week. That's kind of off the wall and totally random. And the first couple of weeks I decided to try this, I was able to sneak it in right up front. It was great. And the last 2 weeks, I've been dedicated to doing it at some point, but I've been doing it semi-randomly in the middle of the pre-show or as the transition from pre-show to follow-up. And I've been trying so hard not to call attention to it so it would be more natural and take you guys off guard. But now you have ruined yet another one of my attempts. And I think last time was my fault because I made a Clubhouse joke and then everything went off the rails. But you have ruined yet another attempt of mine because I do have a question for you all to have some sort of icebreaker in the beginning. And it seems like this is a futile attempt to add a new feature to the show.
You both are overthinking this. Marco's overthinking his I've got to change what I would naturally say. You're overthinking both of the thing that you're doing, Casey. It happens naturally. You don't need to plan to do it. We just got to go with the flow. I don't know why 7 or 8 years in, it's all of a sudden you're trying to do this thing. Just go. It'll be fine.
Well, so here actually, since you've asked, now we're really going off in the weeds. I worry a lot. Worry is maybe too strong a word. I think a lot, and I'm somewhat worried that one day we're going to wake up and we're going to realize that we haven't really changed with the times. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. No, just hear me out for a second before you jump all over me.
I have news for you. We already aren't changing with the times, and it's fine.
Well, no, and that's fair. But I think that there are some things that we can do while not destroying the spirit of the show. And askatp is an excellent example of that, which we totally didn't steal from Upgrade, not one bit.
It's the new feature of the show that we added 5.5 years ago.
Well, still. But no, I think that there are things that I just don't want to look around in 5 or 10 years, God willing, and be like, wow, we really haven't done anything different in a long, long time. And I don't think we're really guilty of that yet. I think a membership almost a year ago now, I think that was a great development, and I really am pleased with how that's going. And actually, I was thinking earlier today, it's been a while since we've thanked everyone properly. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
It really means a lot to all three of us. I think membership is a nice change like that, but I don't want to be in a situation where all of a sudden I realize the world has moved on and us three old dudes are sitting here, just talking to each other, which for the record, I would still be doing even if no one was listening. But, if there's something that we can be doing differently or some little spice that we can add to the show from time to time, I want to do that. And I'm scared that I'm going to get complacent, and I'll just speak for myself now, that I'm going to get complacent and just be like, oh, I'm sure everything's great. And then we become ever more irrelevant with each passing day, which is probably happening anyway. But
well, you're getting a head start in your midlife crisis here or something. You should relax, Casey, because if you're wondering if we're falling behind the times, just watch to see on all of the Mac websites whatever topic we've been talking about for the past month suddenly appear, and you will know that we are not behind the times. We are, as always, slightly ahead.
Well, there's some amount of truth to that, and I hope that remains true.
Yeah, I mean, like I think a lot about making sure our show is good. I care a lot about that, and as I know you both do, and I think the key to a lot of this stuff is like to know who you are and to know who your audience / customers are, and to do like what keeps you comfortably making something that's good for you and for them, without trying to be something you're not. Also, like this is something like you look around the tech business. You got places like Twitter that is famous for not knowing who they are, always trying to be somebody else, to varying degrees of failure. They never succeed. They just like fail in different ways. True. Twitter's always trying to be mostly Facebook and oftentimes other things mixed in.
How's your Reels?
Oh God, I don't even know what that is. I'm so glad.
Isn't that the Instagram stories?
Oh, that's Instagram TikTok, I think, isn't it?
I don't even know anymore.
Or is it Twitter, TikTok, Instagram? I don't know. Anyway, so it's if you try to be something you're not, then that doesn't usually work, and everyone can tell, and it doesn't go well. But I think if your customers have a certain thing they want, and you can keep giving it to them in like a good, high quality way that doesn't feel stale, it just feels like consistent. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as it's still good. Like usually when things start feeling stale is when they start getting like super repetitive and they kind of like run out of things to talk about, and you're kind of just like fishing for topics every week. Like that happens to podcasts after a while, especially those that are not particularly news based. But that hasn't happened to us because we are so news based, and I think we also have a healthy amount of diversion every episode that
whatever do you mean
keeps people interested. And so
maybe too much diversion,
possibly, yeah. And we've actually had ebbs and flows of the amount of diversion that we allow into the show versus some kind of topic or structure. The amount of follow up we allow in, the amount of questions, like that fluctuates over time. But I think as long as we keep putting out a show that our listeners like, that we don't really have to necessarily care about what everyone else is doing, as long as what we are doing is working for our customers, which so far it seems to be. And there's lots. I mean, the good thing, like the tech business is so big. Like there's so much. I love that we can go through entire episodes not covering some massive story that everyone else that we listen to has covered on their shows. And it doesn't matter. No one complains to us like, why didn't you talk about this big, like, court drama or Android phone? And it's like, well, that's just not, we ran out of time. We talk about other stuff more, and I'm fine with that, to keep making our show for our listeners who seem to be fine with it. And, whatever everyone else does, that's up to them. But as long as like we know who we are and we know what we do and we keep doing that for our customers who keep wanting it, I think we're fine.
John, thoughts?
Don't worry, Casey. Be happy.
Marco, we got way derailed from you apparently have some Amazon tubes that are in or out of your house.
Well, the tubes that we haven't been able to get for some time, we're now in the balls phase. That's all they make now. They just make a series of balls. But the recent Amazon Echo balls, I talked about them when they first came out a few months back. It seemed like a really good buy because they were something like $70 or $100, something like that. And they were, kind of between the HomePod Mini and the big HomePod, and they sound pretty decent especially for their price. And the Alexa ecosystem has historically been just much more reliable for us. It's been faster to respond to voice queries. It had way more features, like things like it had named multiple timers many years ago now. I regret to inform you all that tonight we unplugged the last Echo in our house, and we've gone all HomePod / HomePod Mini because a combination of two factors. The HomePod Siri has gotten better enough and more reliable enough that the gap has narrowed. The Alexa ecosystem is still significantly faster and more consistent to respond, but the HomePod got close. in many ways. And it got close enough now that we're willing to tolerate the difference most of the time in that regard. But where the Echoes have a problem is that the new Echo Ball series, the hardware is terrible. It's very buggy, and we own 2 of them. We've had multiple issues with both of them. And right now, I don't think I can recommend anybody buy this generation of Echoes. They're terrible. Like, we have issues where the tweeter will fail. Like, there's 2 drivers in there. I'm pretty sure there's a tweeter and a woofer, and the tweeter, which does like the whole high range of sound frequencies, will frequently fail until a power cycle. And the way this manifests is the sound sounds really muffled, as though all the music and stuff is playing through a pillow, because the high frequency sound is it's just dying. It's just not being there. And that will persist until a reboot. And I thought it was a hardware issue. We did a return and a repurchase of one of them, and they both the returned one, the one that replaced it, and the second one we have in the house all have this problem. So I think it's just a problem with this whole generation. And we also have software issues like with them. Like the Echo service has been really buggy on these. And I don't know if that's like just a thing recently with Echo service with all Echoes, because these are the only ones we've used recently. But we are all in on HomePods now, and so far it's fine.
John, are you still running like 44 different voice assistants in the house?
Yeah, I was when you talk about this, I was just thinking about the fact that I have a Google Home Mini still unopened, sealed in the box, because the last like free one that we got as part of whatever Google stuff we're paying for, just no one in the house wanted. So we have, I've got all of them. I talk to most of them at least once a week, probably. Talk to my big Siri ball, the full size Siri, the most, because it controls my lights, but. Yeah, I got a lot of these things in the house. I don't know what I'm going to do with that completely sealed Google Home Mini. It's pretty good as far as like, it's better than the Amazon Dot, I feel like, because we've got one of those too. Like, it's better in terms of the speaker is slightly better, it's nicer looking, and the Google Assistant is actually pretty smart and good at answering questions. It's just that we don't have that many rooms in the house, and in general, I don't bring these things up into the second floor where the bedrooms are, so it's all just first floor stuff. So I don't know. Maybe I'll just give it away to a listener or something.
Like, I feel like with like, there's no way I would run the Google one in my house, just because privacy, trust, and everything. Granted, Google and Amazon are both creepy companies, but I feel like Google is creepier in certain ways. But the Amazon one, like, I was willing to run it all this time because it was so much better than the alternatives. Like, first, it was the only one for a while that was really, defining its category. And then when the alternatives came out, it was just so much better, and it remained so much better for quite some time. And so when something is that much better, it becomes worthwhile to a lot of people to overlook or tolerate the downsides of having that company's stuff in your house for the upside it's providing. But when that gap became smaller, when the HomePods have slowly gotten better, and when the Echo got way worse, that was no longer worth overcoming. So now it's like, while the Echo is still better at certain things, I'd rather not run them in my house if they're not going to be massively better than the HomePods, and they're not anymore.
All right, so I need my icebreaker. It's required now. That's the way the show works, despite what...
you think you're going to do an icebreaker. You have like too many topics, and now you think you still need to throw in an icebreaker?
Yeah, I'm trying to get it in every episode, man. That's the way it works.
It's too much. If you're going to do that, see, Marco's got his thing that he does before follow-up, and then you've got your thing you do before follow-up, and then sometimes Marco has 2 things they do. You're just building a whole separate show before we begin the show. You realize.
Well, you know what? That's bonus content. You're welcome, everyone. All right, so I would ask this question of John, and I probably will try because I'm a fool, but Marco, since you can deal with hypotheticals that are not completely and perfectly fleshed out in every measurable way, you are given the keys to either a boat, and that can be a speedboat, a sailboat, it doesn't matter, a yacht, whatever, or an airplane. And let's assume something, more in the direction of Cessna, and probably with a boat, less in the direction of yacht, more in the direction of like speedboat or sailboat.
Fair.
You're given the keys to something like a personal-ish sized, seating maybe 4 to 10 people, plane or boat. All of the expenses are paid for. You are magically, through the magic of the Matrix, able to pilot whatever it is that you choose. What kind of vehicle are you choosing?
Boat, no question. I'll tell you why. I don't particularly love boats, honestly, but 2 things. Number one, you said I have the skill to drive them. However, I still think I'd be more comfortable driving a boat because I'd be way less likely to die while doing it. So that's number one. Number two, again, while this is not something I actually plan to ever indulge myself in real life, having a boat would provide some utility for my actual life in the sense that we frequently have to travel across a body of water, and having your own boat does make that better in certain ways. Whereas I don't really have any problems that having a small plane would solve for me. Like, I'm not frequently traveling, moderate distances across the country. I don't particularly have any like drive to fly, to just get in the sky and fly my own plane. Like, I'm not like super driven to do that. So they wouldn't have a lot of utility for me, whereas the boat would have utility, and I'd be way less likely to die doing it.
I didn't want you to visit me anyway, then fine. Now, all kidding aside, if you had a motorboat and, define that however you want, I'm not necessarily saying a cigarette boat, but, let's say you had some sort of motorized boat that moved with some amount of quickness. Mm-hmm. I presume there is a place where you are right now that you could dock it probably for $11 gazillion. And then there is a place on the other side of the sound that you could also dock it temporarily when you're trying to go to the mainland. Is that fair?
Not the sound.
The bay, and yes. So
I knew I probably had that wrong, and I was like, no, I think it is. Sorry.
It's the Great South Sound. Anyway,
Sorry.
It's in Long Island. So the issue with boats here is exactly that. It's like, you don't just have to buy the boat, which itself is a whole thing, right? All the jokes about it being a hole in the water you throw money into. Like, there's that, but then also you have to pay for boat parking on both sides. They don't call it that. Mm-hmm. They call it, like, I think slips, but you're basically buying boat parking spots. And you have to buy them on both sides of the body of water. You can't have them year round. You have to take the boat out of the water for the winter because it freezes sometimes, as it recently did. So you have to have boat parking on both sides, which is, as you mentioned, limited and expensive, and the boat, which is very expensive and highly maintenance intensive. And you have to then have a place and a method to lift the boat out of the water for the winter and put it somewhere and, wrap it and, do whatever care is required to do that. And so it's just, it's such a massive pain in the butt that I feel like it's only worth it if you really love boating as a thing. And I don't care about boating as a thing. Like, I would appreciate the utility in transportation that it would provide me. But for the cost of having a boat, I could hire my own private water taxi from the ferry company every single time I cross the bay and still come out way ahead.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think of it that way. I hear you, though.
Yeah, so like I don't think it's ever going to be worth it. The only reason I indulge this is that you said all expenses were paid for magically.
Sure. All right, John, I know you're going to tear this all apart, but let's go ahead. Make me earn it. What would you choose?
You're not going to add any more constraints to this thing?
Not yet. I will fill in blanks if you need me to, but let's just go with it as presented.
But you can't just change it after I have my answer, because you're not going to like my answer. But given what you've said, my answer fits just fine. I would pick the one that has the highest resale value, and I would sell it because I do not want to be on a boat, and I do not want to be on a plane. I don't like being on either one of those things. I wouldn't want to own them. I get seasick. I get airsick. I don't want to die in a plane crash. Just none of them appeal to me whatsoever. It was all about resale value.
I do not want green eggs and ham. I do not like you, Sam. I am. All right, that's fair. That's fair. For me, in this magical world where I could just snap my fingers and know how to fly a plane and have like a Cessna or something like that, it is appealing, but I come back to what you had said, Marco, as much as I was giving you grief about it. There's not a lot of places that I could just casually fly my Cessna to, right? Like if I'm going to go somewhere, in all likelihood, I would be driving. And if I don't drive, then I would need to like acquire a rental or use like the piece of garbage, like I forget the term for it, but like my understanding is General Aviation has like the house car, so to speak, where it's some like beat up Caprice from 50 years ago that you can borrow to like make a quick errand or run a quick errand or whatever. And so as much as I think knowing how to fly a plane would be fun, and flying it would be incredible fun, the whole falling from the sky thing notwithstanding, I think I would definitely want a boat. And when I was growing up, my family had a Yamaha jet boat, and it was phenomenally fun. We used to go on Candlewood Lake in Western Connecticut, and I think we even had it in the lake that Marco and I met each other at a couple of times.
You did.
I remember my grandfather was furious about it because he hated anything other than a rowboat in that lake. But here we are. And then we also brought it to Lake Wallenpaupack in Pennsylvania, which you might know from The Office, because it was very near Scranton, actually. And my grandparents lived there, and they had a pontoon boat, and that was impossibly fun because, you could either drive all of these boats right up on the sand on like an island or on the shore, because a jet boat has an extremely small draft. A pontoon boat has an extremely small draft. You didn't need a lot of depth to run them. Or the pontoon boat made a great like floating anchor, so to speak, where you could just tie up to the pontoon boat, and it was extremely fun. And I miss that dearly. Gosh, I miss that so much. And in this fantasy world where I could, snap my fingers and have whatever boat I wanted, I would totally get like some obnoxious, ridiculous cigarette boat with like 2 humongous, like supercharged V8s in it, and be that jerk that's like blowing up and down, the lake at 100 miles an hour, which is probably illegal. It would just be impossibly fun. I remember when I was really young, my dad, who was a mechanic professionally for a brief window of time before he started working for IBM, I guess he was just doing this as like a side gig. He took a very wealthy friend of a friend's cigarette boat and was like doing something to the motor because there was a Chevy motor in it. I don't remember what exactly it was, but I remember when Dad was done, the guy who at the time I think was running a Chiquita banana distributor in Newburgh, he took us on the boat on the Hudson, which is kind of hazardous in many ways. But nevertheless, I remember doing like 50 or 60 on the water, maybe even more than that, going under the Newburgh Beacon Bridge and thinking, wow, I usually am in the car with Mom and Dad up there, and now I'm on a boat blasting under it at probably even faster than the cars are going. It was a lot of fun, and so I think that's what I would do.
We are sponsored this week by Fastmail. I'm so happy to have Fastmail as a sponsor. I have been a Fastmail customer for longer than this show has existed. This is the first time I've sponsored anything. So, this was a totally objective thing. I've chosen them and I've stuck with them this entire time because they're just fantastic. So if you're ready to move away from using Google products, Fastmail is a solid option for your email hosting. It works great with the built-in Mail, Calendar, and Contacts apps on macOS and iOS, in addition to offering a great web client. You are in control of your workflow with all the tools to do things your way, whether it's simple and powerful or new and inventive. You can set up processing systems that eliminate unwanted mail and prioritize what's important automatically. And Fastmail also offers modern email features like labels, rules, filters, notification controls, calendar sharing, and so much more. You can bring in all your domains, so you can email from an address that matches your name or a side hustle on one account without paying more. And you can use hundreds of email aliases that keep your main address private. This is what I do. I've been using Fastmail for so long. If you just want straight email hosting with all modern features, but without like you being the product, if you want your data to be private and if you want the incentives of the company hosting your email to be aligned with your incentives, you want Fastmail. Fastmail is independent. They're employee-owned. They believe in working for customers as people to be cared for, not products to be exploited. You can focus on your workflow knowing that your privacy is protected with a business model that does not involve advertisers at all. For over 20 years, Fastmail has been keeping customer data private. It's one of the longest operating and most trusted email services in the world. This is why I use it. This is why Fastmail has been my email host for so long, and I'm so happy with them. People choose Fastmail because it works by putting you in control. They even work on internet standards, and they move the standards forward. They do open source email innovations that powers many email services other than their own. So to be part of the very best in email, go directly to the source. Go to Fastmail at fastmail.com/ATP, and you can try Fastmail for free for 30 days and get 10% off your first year using that link, fastmail.com/ATP. Thank you so much to Fastmail for hosting my email for, I think, over a decade and for sponsoring our show.
All right, let's start with some follow-up because we haven't been talking for half an hour already. We have some smart tools doubts from Jeff E. And John, can you tell me about this, please?
This this is the topic I was alluding to in the part before, which may or may not make it into the show, where a bunch of Mac websites have picked up on the story we've been talking about for a few weeks about potential SSD wear on M1 Macs. And as we discussed on the past several shows, this is all derived from people's doubts about the output of this SmartMon Tools command line tool. And, you know, as we said earlier, we don't know if that tool is correct or accurate or able to give valid statistics. We also don't know how much to compare it to, because unless you've been using this tool for years, maybe what you're seeing is normal, maybe it's not. Everyone's comparing their numbers. They're not sure. So Jeff's doubt is based on the tools. He says, drive makers often use raw values and may obfuscate numbers in the smart fields. Attributes are not really required to follow any format. Makers can use their own attributes, and they may not share how to translate them. Your mileage may vary by vendor. So the tool to read these attributes from the drive, you know, obviously the tool is not endorsed by Apple or blessed by the drive. And also there's not even a good standard for tools to comply to make sure that they're interpreting the values correctly. So who knows what's going on? And in case you were wondering, all the different stories and Mac websites about this have added, as far as I've been able to tell, zero new information. So if there was more information, we would give it to you here, but there isn't. It's just a bunch of people running that tool, looking at the numbers and feeling afraid in varying amounts.
Yeah, it seems like there's definitely some smoke here. You know, one of the things...
Is there, though?
Well, so it's funny you say that. So one of the things that I've been wrestling with of late with regard to the show is when we should indulge the latest... Because I feel like there's always a that's happening in this community, and I don't think that's unique to us. And
that's such a great way to put it.
And I think that's what this is, like the pearl clutching. Oh no! And I feel like all of us, I'm certainly guilty of this. Like, I am no angel, but we all have something that we've gotten worked up about. Like, I don't know, maybe SMS messages, for example. And we all have this thing that we're perfectly executed. Thank you. So we all have this thing that we're worked up about. And a lot of times, if you just give it a week or two, the thing will get resolved, or it'll blow over, or more information will come out, or so on and so forth. And there's a bunch of topics in the show notes document that nobody can see but us, where, you know, this thing was like super dramatic, and then it got resolved, and we never had the time to talk about it. And so the three of us keep arguing as to whether or not we should give it any airtime at this point. And I feel like this is one of those things that we're right on the cusp between, yes, this is something to legitimately be worked up about, or no, this is just this week's and I'm not sure which one it is, but we'll see over time. I'm quite sure.
Well, my criteria for deciding which way to go on those things is there something technically interesting to discuss? Because even for stories, and that's why I'm the big defender of the one story you're referring to down at the top, is because even if the thing is over, even if the controversy is over, very often there is some related technical detail that is not over and is very relevant, and is a thing that listeners to the podcast, I think, would, you know, be well served to know about, right? And the reason I brought up this whole SSD wear thing is entirely because I was hoping and expecting that we would get to some kind of technical explanation. Yes, in the beginning it's all dramatic and like, oh, well, you know, something weird is going on and the M1s are new or whatever. But at this point, if you look at these stories, it's like people have it on Intel Macs, people have it on old Macs, on new Macs, on Macs with lots of RAM, on Macs with not a lot of RAM. Look at my numbers, look at your numbers. It's all over the map. Like it's getting less clear instead of more clear. So this may be one of those things that we'll have to revisit, like when it starts to manifest in a way that is consistent enough for someone to take action. So, for example, if Apple does like a repair program, where like, oh, if you got one of these early M1 Macs, there was a problem that was causing the SSDs to wear out, and we'll replace them for free, right? And then we'll know it's absolutely definitely a thing, right? But for now, it's still just a bunch of people running a command line tool that may or may not be accurate and looking at numbers that they have no comparison for, except for other people who ran the same thing 10 minutes ago. I hope there's some kind of reason for the variance, but the reason may very well be, just like Jeff said, oh, well, actually, it's different vendors' drives and they return bogus numbers, or the tool doesn't know how to interpret them. So that's why it looks like somebody is writing 100 terabytes an hour and the other person is writing 100 terabytes every 10 years.
We spoke last week about Clubhouse, and we're probably going to talk about that more in a little bit, and how we were all kind of grossed out to varying degrees about the Contacts API in iOS and how you're allowed to basically slurp up an entire address book full of data. And Rick Santos wrote us to point out that there is an API to autofill email addresses without asking for contacts permission. And this was mentioned in WWDC 2020 sessions. They're called, and we'll put links in the show notes, Build Trust Through Better Privacy and Autofill Everywhere. I didn't have the chance to go through these and kind of look through them, and I'm guessing that neither of you did either. But nevertheless, it sounds like there is at least some amount of motion in this direction. And where was it? Was it on Dithering that I think that there was some call, like we had said, for having a Photos-esque front end from a user perspective to the contacts API? You know, you can bless a small series of contacts, or you can just slurp everything up, have at it.
Yeah, maybe I was half remembering this WWDC session when I was proposing an API like this, because I did watch a lot of these and I probably had it in the back of my mind. So I'm glad that's a thing. The other thing that people have talked about that I think doesn't quite exist yet, but that I was also alluding to in past episodes, is even for situations where you want to answer the question, hey, has anybody else in my contacts signed up for this service? So I can know to like friend them or whatever. You can even answer that question without giving out your contacts. If you just do one-way hashes of everything and have a standardized system for sharing those one-way hashes, you can find out, sort of in a secure way where all you pass over is a bunch of one-way hashes that cannot be turned into contact information, and then people can match them up. Now, obviously, this is up to the existence of these APIs and also the willingness of the service to be nice about it, right? Because, it's... Currently, if you give contact access, they have access to your actual contacts. So they could be nice and say, oh, no, we only make hashes of them and compare them. We don't store them. But that's not what they're doing. So, baby steps here. But the point that we tried to make last week is lots of things like this are technically possible where you can get almost all of the features you have now without giving your contacts to anybody, which is ideal.
Indeed. We also spoke last week about the rumor that the iPhone will get an astrophotography mode, and we were fairly clueless about it. And a handful of people have written in to point us in the direction of Google, who has already been doing this, which we should have known. And there's an excerpt from Android Authority that I'd like to read. The Pixel 4 combines 16 15-second exposures into a single 4-minute mega exposure, for lack of a better term, while the Pixel 3a and the Pixel 3 combine 4 of these frames into a 1-minute exposure. To actually capture astrophotography shots, you'll need a tripod or some other makeshift way of holding your phone completely still, and then you'll have to enter night shift mode for the phone to automatically enter astrophotography mode. If you click through to this link, it actually does have some darned impressive images, and I know that Google Phone's still images are, generally speaking, accepted to be really, really, really good. And these are no exception. They're very impressive and worth checking out. And obviously the link will be in the show notes.
Yeah, whether or not Apple actually does this, the fact that there was a rumor about it and the fact that Google already does a thing like it puts strong weight towards Apple doing whatever they need to do to be competitive with what Google's doing. Or they could just not do it at all, and that rumor is totally wrong. But knowing that this feature exists on Android really pushes heavily in the direction of Apple saying, we're going to do that too, or we're going to do that same thing, but we have a better way that like doesn't require a tripod or something. You know what I mean? Yeah,
absolutely. All right, and then we spoke, I don't remember if it was last week or the week before, but recently we've spoken about magnets and MagSafe. And Ante Soderholm writes, regarding magnets and MagSafe, accessories can use magnets of their own to make the attachment stronger. I've got a car mount for my phone that uses MagSafe. It has its own magnets to make the attachment stronger so that the phone doesn't come loose when you hit a bump while driving. I'm actually a little confused about this. Isn't MagSafe, doesn't that require magnets on both the receptacle and the phone itself? So like there's going to be quote unquote magnets of their own regardless, right? I think I'm just confused.
I think this is just the idea that, there's probably some standard for MagSafe where you're supposed to make these many magnets in these positions of these strengths, but there's nothing saying that you can't. There's nothing saying that you can't put much, much stronger magnets on the accessory side to try to help out. You know what I mean? So this is the theory. We got a lot of feedback from people saying, I have a bunch of MagSafe accessories for my car, and they're just plain old MagSafe with no super strong magnets, just like the same ones you'd get from a puck. And my phone doesn't fall off when I go over bumps. So apparently it's good enough to work for a lot of people. The other factor that we talked about, I forget what Marco called it. What did you call the force that
sandwich closing force?
Anyway, to be a little bit more precise about that, The magnets are pushing the two
More
surfaces
precise
together.
than sandwich closing force.
Yeah, the magnets are pushing the two surfaces together, but the thing you care about in a car mount is the friction between the two surfaces. And Apple's puck has terrible friction because it's hard metal. It's like a ring of hard. You see what it looks like. It's like a little silver ring of metal, and then a slightly indented region. That metal region is the surface that is pressing against your phone. If you have nothing on your phone, then it's a ring of smooth metal against smooth or matte finish glass. There's not a lot of friction between those surfaces. If you have leather case, then it's a ring of smooth metal against leather. What you really want is tacky rubber against tacky rubber. And given the same magnetic force, if you have tacky rubber against tacky rubber with that same sandwich closing force, as Marco calls it, that's actually pretty strong. That said, it really depends on the size of the potholes in your area. I can't imagine any MagSafe thing surviving some of the things that I've hit that have bent my actual wheels.
All right, then we had a little bit more on supervised iPhones from Mark Wickens. If you recall, this is an iPhone that is owned by your employer, and thus they can, do a lot with it. And we were talking about how, well, there's not actually that much they can do with it from Apple's perspective in terms of snooping what you're doing and like your web browsing and whatnot. And Mark wrote in a good point that I had considered, but I don't think I mentioned on the show and certainly glossed over if I did. And Mark writes, regarding managed devices and privacy, something I don't think you mentioned is that it's possible for an employer to enforce an always-on VPN via a configuration profile. You should know about it if your employer has done this, but just in case anyone thought based on your recent follow-up that everything was guaranteed to be private, if the device is sending all internet traffic via your employer's VPN, then they can monitor a lot more. See earlier episodes when we mentioned Facebook VPN app that got banned. There's a page that has instructions to find out if this is the case, and we'll put a link in the show notes. And that's a really excellent point. So basically, your employer could hypothetically force all of your internet traffic to funnel through them, and if they're going to be effectively your ISP, then yeah, they can look at whatever they want, and that's worth considering.
We are sponsored this week by Buzzsprout, your podcasting success toolkit. It's really great to start a podcast. I love this medium. As you all know, we're all big fans of podcasts around here. You probably are too if you're listening to this. Podcasts are more popular than ever, and the barrier to entry is never been lower. And there's a lot of places that will host your audio files, but Buzzsprout gives you a complete toolkit, including best-in-class publishing tools that are really easy to use, a full team of podcast pros ready to answer your questions, the best educational resource for podcasters, because the team at Buzzsprout, they really care about helping you succeed. They are also very forward-thinking. They have great modern features like magic mastering to automatically make your podcast episodes sound better by fixing any mismatched levels and reducing noise. Dynamic content, if you want to upload audio clips that you can add and remove from your podcast episodes on the fly for things like time-limited announcements or sponsorships. They also support modern things like the full support of the new podcast namespace, which allows you to add more information to your RSS feed for increased discoverability and accessibility. But Buzzsprout is also privacy-focused. This is all done with no creepy audience tracking or targeting. So all of this and so much more is available on every Buzzsprout plan, starting at just $12 a month. And Buzzsprout's offering our listeners 3 months free on whatever plan works best for you. So go to buzzsprout.com/promo and use code ATP to get 3 months free on your Buzzsprout plan. Once again, buzzsprout.com/promo with code ATP for 3 months free. Start that podcast that you've been thinking about, or switch to Buzzsprout if you're already podcasting somewhere else. Buzzsprout is ready to help you become a successful podcaster. Thank you so much to Buzzsprout for sponsoring our show.
John, you have some Clubhouse thoughts. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I've used Clubhouse a lot more since last episode, and at all. I mean, I was sad
more
to
than
learn
zero.
I was sad to learn that my username was already taken. In fact, it had already been taken when we were discussing it. But it was taken by someone who I think is actually Italian, so I guess that's fine. But I really wish I'd gotten that first. There's a lot of people with my last name in the world. Not all of them are in Italy. Anyway. A few points to note before I talk about my experiences on there. The sign up for Clubhouse is that you sign up with your phone number. You don't sign up with your email address, although you can enter an email address and everything, but you sign up with your phone number. And that's interesting for a couple of reasons having to do with the social network. But before we get to that, there's an aspect that Marco will love, which is they don't have passwords. They use the Marco login system. So every time you want to sign in, it's like the things that Marco makes that drive me up a wall, where you go to sign in and it says, hey, do you want to sign in? Enter your identifier here. And then it says, okay, great, we'll email you a link. And they email you a link and you click the link and you log in. That's it. That's the only way. I mean, for now. I mean, maybe they'll change it, but
how do you really feel,
interesting. I don't like having to go. I'm at the login page. I want to log in. I don't want to be at the login page and have to go back to my email client. But that's what they do. Apparently, if you're going to invite somebody, we were talking last time, I don't want to share my contacts because it forces you to share your contacts. It was like, oh, Casey, just get another phone and empty out all your contacts and turn off iCloud and then and then do it and then invite me. Apparently, the app only lets you invite somebody who's in your contacts. So if you were to empty out your contacts and then say, okay, here you go. Here's my contacts. Haha, there's nothing there. Now please let me invite somebody. When you went to invite me, it wouldn't work. So you'd have to add me specifically to your contacts and then invite me, which is silly. Again, this is a young service. Things change a lot. So who's to say how this will be? But all this is to say is they're very adamant about getting your contacts. Because really, there's no reason they need your contacts for you to invite people. And then even if you try to work around it, it's like, forcing you to at least add the people you want to invite to your contacts. And the phone number thing and the contacts thing brings to mind a topic that is near and dear to any new social network's heart, which is, how do you bootstrap any kind of social network? How do you start building the web of people who are friends or followers or whatever terminology you use to make your social graph and your network? How do you get that going? A while back, various social networks used to allow you to essentially hijack their social network by saying, please tell me all the relationships between this person and any other person that they have as friends or followers or whatever. And that turned out to be a bad idea as far as those companies were concerned, and they started locking that down. So it used to be like, for example, that if you went on a social network, you could give it your Twitter handle, and then it could crawl your Twitter relationship graphs and just say, oh, we know all these people, looks like that and we'll invite them, and you can invite them here, or...
That, honestly, I'm pretty sure that is what made Instagram take off. Like, Instagram took off massively because they were sucking in the Twitter graph, and then Twitter cut it off, like, about a few months into that, once they realized, like, oh, this is probably strategically not a great thing to do.
Yeah, and it's in some ways it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game because you can get this it's not, the information is available to a human with a web page clicking with a mouse. It's supposedly not available through APIs. It depends on how devious you want to be and how much you anticipate being sued or whatever. But anyway, it's a problem every social network faces. People don't want to go in and have to be like, oh, I'm on this thing and I don't have any friends or followers or people who I follow. How do I find people to follow? Why can't you just tell me if any of my friends are on here so I can follow them? Or better yet, why don't you just make me automatically follow everybody who I already follow on Twitter or who I already am friends with on Facebook? And that, while that's good for users, it's bad for Twitter and Facebook. So that's why they can't do that. So the phone number thing as the way to build a social network is interesting because, well, for a couple of reasons. One, as was discussed on Dithering recently, most people only have one or maybe two phone numbers. So it's a slightly more reliable identifier for a person. Whereas things like email addresses or usernames, you can make an unlimited number of those. Bots can make them really quickly. Any individual human probably already has many email addresses, and it's really easy to make new ones. And so it's hard to say what the actual social graph is if people can just make up usernames. I have multiple Twitter accounts. They're all me, but there's no real way for Twitter to know that unless they're doing some kind of IP tracking, and even then that can be unreliable. But if you have phone numbers, it's harder to make bots. And I say this and knowing full well that next episode someone's going to send us follow-up saying, well, you don't understand how easy it is to grind out new phone numbers for these giant spam farms. So I'm saying it's harder, not impossible, right? But it's harder to make bots. And it ties your identity for regular people who don't easily have access to get new phone numbers constantly, or it's just a big hassle. It ties your identity and reputation more closely to the thing that you are signing in with. And then for your social network, although you might not have like knowing all of the Facebook names and Twitter handles of everybody, in your contacts, the most likely thing you are to have is either an email address or a phone number. And if it's on your phone, maybe, and especially if everyone you know doesn't use iMessage or whatever, you probably have their phone numbers, which is their identifier as far as you're concerned for text messaging and other things that you do from your phone. So if you can't get access to the Twitter graph and you can't get access to the Facebook graph or the Instagram graph or whatever, your best bet for building that network is to go with telephone numbers from people's cell phones that are more reliably, uniquely identify people and that are likely to be in their contacts database. And you can ask that for access for it. So it makes perfect sense why Clubhouse is very enthusiastic, let's say, about getting your contacts, because it wants to build its network, and it wants to build its network in a reliable way that's harder to spam or pollute or, fill with garbage. Part of this identity-based, more reliable identity-based system where you can't easily make 1 million throwaway accounts is that when you get on to Clubhouse, I don't know how long this is going to be there, but when I was invited on and I go to my profile page, at the bottom of my profile page, it says nominated by, and then the person who invited me. And I don't know how long that's going to stay there. Is that going to stay there forever? And so it's like, if you invite someone to Clubhouse, forever you are responsible for any garbage thing they do, because everything is go to their profile and say, this person was nominated by so-and-so. Why did so-and-so invite this guy on? He's a jerk. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I thought it was interesting, especially given how hard it would be to sort of, again, make throwaway accounts or disassociate yourself from your number. It's a hassle to change your phone number. It's really easy to make a new Twitter handle. So I will continue to be nominated by the nice person who gave me an invite. When someone gets, when you've shared your contacts and someone in your contacts comes on to Clubhouse, I don't know if they do this all the time, but many people have been reporting that they get a notification that says, hey, welcome your friend Joe Schmo to Clubhouse, like an iOS notification on your phone, which is kind of creepy because it's like they're rubbing it in your face that they have all your contacts. Wait, how did you know that I know? Oh, I gave you all my contacts. I thought you weren't going to look at those. like that's the thing. When people give access to their contacts, they're like, okay, well, this is probably just for something to make it easier to do in the program or whatever. But it's like, no, they actually look at those and use them. And so every time they say, we noticed something that happened, and then you're like, oh, it's depressing. But the second aspect of this that's creepy and disconcerting and has already caught me is if you tap that notification that says, hey, your friend Joe Schmo is joining Clubhouse, why don't you welcome them? If you tap that notification, it launches you directly into a live, real-time, two-way audio conversation with that person.
Oh, God.
With no intervening, like it makes a room in Clubhouse, like it just throws you right in there. Like not even like because there's nothing in the welcome message that makes you think that's going to happen, because you're like, well, I can tap this and it'll probably like show me their profile page, or at the very least prompt me, hey, do you want to talk to so-and-so? Nope, I'm making a room. Here you are. They're invited in. And you could be suddenly in a real-time audio conversation that you had no expectation would happen. So
oh my God.
That seems like
that can backfire in so many ways.
A part of the app that the Clubhouse folks might want to reconsider, because that is going from 0 to 60 awful fast. I get a creepy notification, I tap it, and now they can hear what I'm saying and I can hear what they're saying. No, that's not good.
Oh, God. Yeah. Geez, like you think about every possible scenario that you could be in. Who could they be? Like, people you have in your contacts. Mm-hmm. I don't know a lot of people who frequently go through and delete people out of their contacts. Like most people have contacts in their phone, and the number just always increases. They never go through and filter them out because there's usually not much reason to go like delete contacts. Like I went through mine when I had that sync issue a few months back with Big Sur. I went through that, and that was the first time I had deleted contacts in probably 12 years. Like I was going through deleting people who like I literally haven't talked to since 2006. And like I had their contact info from back then, but there was just no reason to ever go through. So imagine, like ex-boyfriends could be in there, ex-bosses. Like, oh God, that could go very badly.
Yeah, those are two things brought up by a lot of our listeners. Like all these social networks, they're just trying to make edges, make lines between nodes, but they don't have the knowledge based on, we got all your contacts. is this your abusive ex-boyfriend or girlfriend?
Right.
Is this the boss that you hate? Is this your ex-wife who you're currently not speaking to? Is this like just someone who you just don't want to be talking to? Like, it doesn't know that. It just knows, well, here's some contact information. It's not like people annotate them with the desirability of suddenly being in a real-time conversation with them. So this seems like not the correct default for anyone. I mean, in many ways, it's similar to the problem, that Facebook and everything had forever, where they'll try to bring up memories from your past, but they have no idea if they're good memories or bad memories. Even if it's something like, oh, look, it's a picture of your dog and your dog just died. They're trying to be helpful, but they don't know what they don't know. And it's a dangerous thing to do at scale. So I would suggest that Clubhouse reconsider this. I have heard a lot of reports of people who are on Clubhouse way earlier, because Clubhouse has been around for a while. I've been seeing Twitter discussions of it forever, and I could not for the life of me figure out what it was. Like for however many months people have been talking about it. Maybe they're talking about two different things, because I think there might be two things called Clubhouse. Anyway, I've heard that the app has changed a lot in the short time that it has existed. So, and it's still in closed beta invite only. So these are some suggestions that Clubhouse might want to change. Now, as for experiences, I intentionally tried to, once I got on the thing and finished mourning about not getting my username, I wanted to
You're still not over that.
No, it's really upsetting. Now, as many people said, sort of facetiously, but not really facetiously, now I'm rooting for the service to fail. Because if I can't get my username, it just needs to be burned down.
That's it. It's over.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they'll just get bought by, Facebook or whatever the heck happens to actual social media stars.
I bet they're bought within 6 months.
Or they just get Instagram storied.
Oh, to be fair, I think both will happen. I think they're going to be bought by somebody within 6 months, and also they're going to get Instagram storied.
Yep.
Yeah. I tried to get into a bunch of rooms to try to use this thing. That was tricky for me because I haven't given it my contacts, so I don't have much of a social graph on the network. I mean, I'm doing it the old-fashioned way, which is follow one person that you know is there, like the person who invited me, and then look at who they follow, and then follow all the people you know who they follow, and then just keep iterating, and then look at those people, and then look who they follow, and then look who they follow. So I'm bootstrapping my social network by digging down the tree of people I know and just scrolling through all of their contacts until I don't recognize anybody. You know what I mean?
That is so much better than how I did it. So I decided, like, normally my problem usually with new services is I usually wait. Usually anything that comes out that everyone's talking about, I'm too skeptical of. Or I'm too slow to it, so I'll be like, Twitter's gonna be a passing fad. I don't need to sign up on Twitter, but usually, that resulted in me missing some huge activity there, and then I get there late, and I regret having missed the earlier stuff. And so this time I thought, let me do it right, even though I know it's, again, as you said, it's been around for a while, but let me do it right. I'm going to go into this all optimistic. And so I went in and I actually did the thing where you fill out your interests up front, which are hilarious, by the way. Like, one of the interests you could pick was podcasts. Period. Just podcasts. Like, okay, that's a bit broad, but
they also
okay.
had TV and movies, but I was baffled by those lists too, because they were so short. There was like a list of 7 things. And it's like, is that the world of entertainment? Those 7 things?
Yeah. And so I went through that. I actually honestly, all right, well, yes, I do like podcasts, so I picked that. I picked, probably 5 or 6 other things on the list of poorly chosen blobs. And then I went to, and then it shows this list of, like, people you might like to follow. And it was all just like investor dicks. Like, it was just like, it was nobody I want to follow. It was all just like a whole bunch of like trendy, like futurists and all those people who I just have no tolerance for. And I accepted every single recommendation. I followed all of them. So I'm like, I want to know what people are at, like how this service is actually being, experienced by the people who are saying how great it is. I want to see why it's so great. And so I followed every single person they recommended, and it's all these people who I would never in a million years choose to follow on any other service. but I thought, hey, I want to get a good picture of this thing. And so, yeah, the list of channels that I was exposed to during my time trying it, oh man, I did not find anything good.
Yeah, I don't know why you would do that. I get your idea of, like, I want to see what other people are seeing, but you don't want to see what other people are seeing.
It's funny because I think I did something in between you guys. I definitely and honestly filled out that interest, like, I don't know, questionnaire isn't the right word for it, but the like, what do you like? Do you like this? Do you like that? And I filled that out honestly. And then I, saw, or I tried to look up a handful of people that I thought were already there that I know or enjoy their work. And I started following them. But I feel like the suggestions that I get 99% of the time, or at least the suggestions from people that I'm not following. So it's one thing if, like, I think it's this coming Friday, Matt Bischoff is doing some sort of thing on Clubhouse that sounded reasonably interesting. But for like just random things, like I'm getting, oh God, I keep tapping into these rooms like an idiot. I'm getting Housing Around, which is a bunch of people I don't recognize. Welcome to Clubhouse. In Convo with Mike Judge. I don't know if that's the Mike Judge or not.
I like Mike Judge.
Yeah, that'd be kind of cool if that's the case.
I would love to listen to that some other time when I can.
Exactly.
Feature of most modern media.
Right. State of Crypto Policy and Houston Lives benefit concert. And that's the things that are offered to me on like the main screen. And I'm not particularly interested in any of that. And every time I open up Clubhouse, which I keep doing to just see like, okay, what is there that people are talking about right now that may or may not be interesting to me? And it's just never interesting to me, which isn't by necessity a failing of Clubhouse. Like that could be a failing on my part because I just don't like the sorts of things that Clubhouse seems to like. It could be a failing on my part because I don't follow the right people. And so it's not bubbling up the right stuff. But I don't know. And there was a lot of talk about this on Upgrade this week, and I really, really thought it was an excellent, excellent discussion. And a lot of it was around, and this is what I was kind of referring to earlier in our show, are we getting passed by, says Mike and Jason, because we're not particularly interested in this. And I think Jason in particular said, I don't want to approach any new thing and be like, oh, that sucks. I want to at least investigate. And you were saying this also, both of you were.
Yeah, I've done that in the past. I've regretted doing that in the past, and I'm trying to get better at not doing that. To new things now.
Same, completely agree. And I don't know. I just the impression I had before having gotten an invite was that it seemed very like Silicon Valley bro-y, which I have like a deep repulsion to. Like I just find all of that just repulsive in so many ways. And
agreed.
I do think Clubhouse is more than that, but it also seems pretty clear to me that that's where the like bread and butter is still right now. Like, growth hacking and influencing and doing all that stuff that like is just, I don't know, I find it icky. And that's not to say that it will always be that way. I think obviously it started that way because that's the people who made it, or VC people, and they showed it to their VC friends, and they're all having VC fantasy lives in their VC, fake world. But nevertheless, it's I haven't seen anything yet that makes me say, oh, that's totally sweet. And I can envision ways that it might be totally sweet. And like, if the two of you wanted to sometime and get on and do a show or whatever it's called, whatever the vernacular is, and do something for a few minutes just for funsies, I'd totally try it. But I don't know, nothing about it has really grabbed me in the way that it like only took a few minutes or maybe, I don't know, a day for Twitter to really land once I gave it an honest shake, because I had the same impression as you did, Marco. Like, who cares? Like, no, I don't want this in my life. No. And then once you give Twitter an honest shake, was at least back in 2008, before it was truly toxic, it was pretty obvious pretty quick that it was good stuff. And Instagram, holy crap, Instagram, it was like 4 seconds before you realized, oh, this is delightful. And I haven't yet gotten that from Clubhouse. And maybe this is just reason 7,455,002 that I'm an old man. But I don't know, it just hasn't stuck with me quite yet.
Well, I feel like these communities are influenced by the sort of founding members, and whether or not it's because they're a VC-backed company that it seems VC bro-y, or whether that's just like the first people who are there. I think things like Twitter benefited from the fact that the founding settlers, the first people who had Twitter accounts, are in our circle of friends. So of course it's going to feel welcoming and normal to us. And as I was trying to say last time about introverts versus extroverts, it could be that there is a community of people that is ill-served by the current services, and those are exactly the people who are sort of the founding members of this one. So when they show up here, it's all their people doing things that they want to do, and so it may be awesome for them. Like the reason we're looking at it at all is because it has some amount of buzz. That said, it's a young service and young application, and there's lots of complexities. the whole thing of again, bootstrapping your social network, that thing where it asks you your interests is an attempt to do that because, okay, if you wouldn't give us your contacts, we can't help you there. But even if you did give them, we can't really make heads or tails of most of it because, again, we don't know which person in this contacts is the type of person you'd like to talk to on Clubhouse and which is the type of person you'd never want to talk to again, and they just happen to still be in your contacts. So the interest thing, which, music services, of course, do this for recommendation engines and, anything. Pick from this big, giant cloud of stuff and tell us what you're into, and then we'll try to give you some kind of intelligent suggestion. Obviously, that is undercut if what you pick as your interest, no one is talking about that in Clubhouse because it's still invite only. It's a small group of people, and those people are of a particular type or a particular circle of friends or whatever. Because remember, people get onto Clubhouse by being invited by other people, so it's kind of, it's growing from whatever that original core was. If there's no one discussing your thing, you can pick it as an interest, but you're not going to see it. But, as I was mentioning before about the interest thing, when I was filling them out, I was shocked at how bad the interest interface was just because there are things I'm interested in that I couldn't select and they weren't super weird. So Marco picked podcasts. I picked, television and gaming or whatever. But here, this one really drives it home. This one should really drive it home for everybody. They have a category for sports. Here are the sports that you can select. This is as far as Clubhouse is concerned, this is the entire world of sports.
The whole wide world of sports.
Yep. Football, soccer, MMA, cycling, baseball, cricket, tennis, Formula One, basketball, golf. That's it. There are no other sports. Nothing else exists in the world of sports except for those 10 things.
I'm pretty sure I can come up with a better list than that.
I'm pretty sure, that's not even even if you wanted to be charitable and say, it's a very US-centric list, it's not. They're trying to cover the literal world of sports, the entire globe, and they come up with 10 things. Sports is a little bit, and I'm pretty sure sports is not an obscure topic that they wouldn't have lots of detail on. Now maybe these categories are fed by people creating rooms. Maybe I don't understand how they're coming in here, but if you can't get a good social graph and recommendations for your contacts because, say, you didn't share them or they're just not anything to go for, and people try to diligently fill out their interests, like Casey was doing, I'm going to say what I'm interested in, and then they go back to your main screen and they're trying to say, show me something. I want to do this thing. I filled out my interests. I gave you my contacts. I don't know what to do next. Clubhouse needs to find a way to throw up something that you can tap on and get into and understand it. Now, the one thing they have that does work a little bit better than these two things is what worked for me is if you enable notifications, which I never do for any app, but pretty quickly I learned with Clubhouse, I'm going to be like Casey, where you launch the app, you look at it and go, nah, and you turn it off. And I did that for a couple days in a row. I'm like, I'm not using Clubhouse. I'm just launching the app and then saying, no, nothing interested me in leaving.
Yep.
So I've got to do something else. And what I did was I enabled notifications, which is very rare for me. I enable notifications almost nothing on my phone. And the reason I enabled them is because I understood that if you follow people, I did do the thing that I was describing where I would follow someone and then go through the list of everybody they follow and follow those people and so on and so forth. So I built a little graph for myself of a bunch of people who I follow. If one of the people you follow starts a room, subject to whatever algorithm they're using, they may or may not send you notifications that says, hey, your friend Joe Schmo just made a room on Clubhouse. Do you want to join? And again, if you tap that notification, you're in that room instantly. Although you're not, you probably won't have the ability to speak. Anyway, so that's what I did. And I was lucky enough of the small handful of people that I was following. One of them was actually experimenting with Clubhouse by creating rooms and doing stuff. And that was Paul Hudson of, what's his website? Hacking with Swift, I think. He was just trying the thing out. And the way he was trying it out is, as a bit more of an extrovert than I am, he was making rooms and inviting people in and, saying, okay, we're going to have a room. One of the first ones I was in, he was like, let's do iOS interview questions, where he was going to, pull people from the audience and give them a question that they might receive if they were interviewing for a job as an iOS developer. And the person from the audience would try to answer it, and then they would talk about it. That was it. That was the whole room. And he did that for hours. And
That's
I just listened
clever.
to it. I listened to it ambiently like you would listen to a podcast. It's the type of, it's kind of like a call-in show, but here's me bringing my own interests to Clubhouse it's basically like a tech podcast, right? Like talk radio and people calling in to tell you that, what their coach of their favorite sports team should have been doing, or political talk radio or stuff like that. That would work in this format as well, but I'm not interested in any of those things. Same deal with growth hacking and, how to get press for your startup or Bitcoin or all sorts of other things that I'm not interested in, and they have rooms where people are talking about. But what I'm interested in is tech nerdy stuff and people who run websites to tell you how to program in Swift, right? And so when he made a room and started doing these interview questions, it was like a nerdy version of talk radio, where instead of the people coming on the line and yelling about, their favorite sports team, they would politely answer questions about iOS. And so I got two things from it. One, I actually learned a lot about iOS and Swift, right? Because how can you not? Like, it was just question after question after question, most of which I didn't know the answer to until they were answered, and then they discussed the answers. So that was fun. And two, it has the same entertainment value as a call-in show where there's a host who's doing a good job, and Paul does a really good job of being a host. He's cheating by being British, but whatever. Sounds very, very proper and correct and official and important to our American ears. And he's also super smart and knows everything. And then you're the participants who were unfailingly, polite and conscientious and humble and smart and just all the things that you would expect. Nobody yelled Baba Booey. No one was being a jerk, right? It was just a bunch of programmers answering programmer questions. So I felt like I was in my element for that type of thing. He did a bunch of other rooms, and every time he started one, I would join it and just listen to it. I forget what his other ones were. Some general discussions of things, like Q&A type stuff. And then the final one I did was, this is the first bigwiggy thing that I've been in. It was a room. I don't know how I got invited. It was probably someone I follow, but it was some famous person that I follow, famous in Apple circles. And it was Steve Jobs stories. I think people were mentioning this on Twitter, so maybe people might have joined it from just seeing tweets about it. It was a bunch of people who knew Steve Jobs when he was alive and who worked with him in various capacities, telling stories about Steve Jobs. Granted, most of which I'd heard already, but it's, if you read every single book that comes out about Steve Jobs and follow him for your whole life, you probably know a lot of these stories, but some of them you won't know. In fact, some of the people who are telling the stories you won't know because they worked with Steve in a very obscure capacity, obscure enough that they haven't been in 7 Forbes profiles, telling their stories or whatever. And this was this entire room. I don't even know which of the famous people was hosting it, but a bunch of people were in there from the original Mac team and old ex-Apple people. And they would just get invited on stage, and they would tell their story. And then someone else would come up as a speaker, and they would tell their story. And that was it. Hours and hours of people telling stories about Steve Jobs. Some of the people who told stories were really good storytellers. Some of them weren't. Some of the stories you heard, some of them you hadn't. But that's what it was. Now, and that was interesting because it was like, famous people, right? So in that way, it's a lot like regular people's relationship to podcasts, where it's by some, I almost said Joe Rogan. I didn't mean to say that, but I don't know, like famous NPR personalities or a podcast featuring Barack Obama, right? Like actual famous people who just happen to be appearing in the medium of podcasts. This was, semi-famous and nerd circle people who were on Clubhouse. It was the type of thing that you can imagine would be more to my taste. I was going to say better, but I'm not going to say better. I'm going to say more to my taste if it had been a podcast. Because if you did a podcast, here's a podcast with people telling stories about Steve Jobs. You'd get only the best stories. You'd edit them, right? You'd produce it. You'd get rid of all the dead air and the parts that didn't work. But making a podcast of people telling stories about Steve Jobs would require hunting down all the people who have stories, getting them to agree to be on your podcast, arranging a time for them to come and record, making sure they're set up so they can record, getting their recording, doing that 20 times, editing it all down, producing it, putting it in, it's way more work than what seemed like this was more or less ad hoc. Hey, we're doing stories about Steve Jobs Clubhouse right now. And then people just come to you. Right? People come and say, I see they're having the Clubhouse thing, and Andy Hertzfeld joins and Bill Atkinson joins, and they're all, and once they appear in the room, the moderators bless them and say, come on stage, you talk. You know what I mean? And so it was ad hoc and messy and not like a produced podcast, but it's also a thing that probably just wouldn't have happened, period, unless there was someone with an established podcast willing to put in the time and energy to make a produced podcast version of this. I saw lots of people saying, like, this is what Clubhouse is great about. Like, you would never see this in a podcast. No, you could absolutely see this in a podcast. It would just be a lot harder. Like I said, the result of that would be more to my tastes, but some people may like this more freeform one. And also, of course, if you're in that room and you happen to have a story about Steve Jobs, you can raise your hand and maybe they'll let you tell your story. And you can never do that with a podcast because you're not there. You're not a participant. You're just listening, right? Both of these things, though, made me think of a few more features that Clubhouse should add to their platform. And we've been talking mostly about, like, what is it like in Clubhouse and what kind of people are there, what are they talking about? But it's important not to lose sight of the fact that, like Twitter or email or Facebook or Instagram, these things are essentially platforms. It's a system that works in a certain way, and that system encourages certain behaviors and discourages others, but it doesn't dictate subject matter or, like, population or relationships, really. You could anything that works in this way, where you want to come into a room where a bunch of other people can be and you can nominate them to speak, anything that fits within that platform will work on Clubhouse. It just so happens this is what we're getting now. And so within that platform features that I think they could really use are pausing and rewinding. Now, you may think that's totally counter this. It has to be live. If you can pause and rewind, like, you're going to be ruining the liveness of the experience and you're going to be behind other people and you won't be able to participate and all that other stuff. But I feel like those two features are kind of essential for the best functionality of their of the features they do have. Because when something is live and you're sort of listening to it the same way you, like, I don't know, like you listen to podcasts, like you're doing dishes or whatever, you don't want to miss, like, the good part of the person who's telling the story about Steve Jobs. You don't want to miss the good part of their story because, you had to talk to somebody or you got distracted for a second or whatever. Or, like, a dog was barking or you were outside taking a walk and a loud truck went by and you didn't hear that last part. It's not actually that difficult to add a little bit of a buffer to allow you to pause or rewind to figure out what somebody said, or to pause for a moment, as long as you have a good UI to say, okay, well, when you're ready to catch back up to real time, do so. In fact, you could even use something like Smart Speed that would let you catch back up without actually skipping over anything. I'm not saying the buffer should be a half an hour long, but 5 or 10 seconds of grace would go a long way towards making Clubhouse a more satisfying experience, because I missed a bunch of things that people said because either I misheard them or there was noise or I had to pause to do something, and there's no way for me to get that back. And I'm sure the Clubhouse people would say, well, that's the beauty of Clubhouse. It's here and then it's gone. It can't be recorded, or of course it can be. But anyway, we discourage it from being recorded, and it's all about being there in the moment, and it's not about recording or rewinding. We just need you to be there in the moment, and if you miss it, that's the beauty of Clubhouse. Sometimes you just miss it because the dog barks, and I'm not down with that particular beauty. I feel like people want to go there to get the value of hearing the cool stories about Steve Jobs. And I love the fact that someone didn't have to arrange all those interviews and make it into a big podcast and everything, and anyone could just join. But I don't like the fact that if I missed what somebody said because I was distracted for a moment, that there's no way for me to get that back. Just a little tiny buffer to pause and rewind would do it. So I'm still not sure Clubhouse is for me. I didn't actually participate. I didn't raise my hand to participate in any of these things. It's not my kind of MO. I did think about types of things that ATP could do in that scenario. Just didn't seem like, I don't know. For now, it just didn't seem like something that I was enthusiastic about participating in as I hate when people say that, as a creator, as they say. That's not to say that will change over time, but I do think I understand some of the value people get out of it. Again, the people who want this type of experience are probably not the same people as me. I like podcasts for a reason, and I would love podcast versions of everything else that I listen to, but I just think that there wouldn't be podcast versions of those because it's so much more work to make a podcast version of those things. It's kind of like how Twitter was the low effort version of blogging. Clubhouse in some ways can be the low effort version of doing an interview podcast.
It's an interesting way of looking at it. Some semi-real-time follow-up. A long time ago, I think it was for a Twitter account. I don't remember which one. I needed a phone number in order to do something. Maybe it was do something with an API. And I didn't want to give them my regular phone number, or I tried and I couldn't. And so I was trying to figure out a way to get another phone number so I could just hand it to Twitter just for the purposes of clearing this hurdle so I can do what I wanted to do. And I'd stumbled upon an app called Burner, which makes sense. And at the time, you could get a free burner that would receive like a handful of text messages or only last a week or something like that. I don't know if that's still the case. I think you have to pay for everything, but it worked really well and gave me a temporary phone number that I could use for the purposes of what I was trying to do. And then it just went away. And additionally, you could use something like Google Voice or whatever the case may be. But yeah, I don't negate your point earlier. I'm just saying that the barrier of entry for getting a new phone number is ever lower, even lower than I would have expected a while ago.
Yeah, the good thing about phone numbers is that the namespace, so to speak, at least in the U.S. of phone numbers, is fairly limited. Unlike the namespace of email addresses, which is essentially unlimited. I mean, it's not really unlimited because there are length limits, but there are way more possible email addresses in the world than there are possible phone numbers. So I always wondered how Google Voice gets away with just handing out free phone numbers. I have a Google Voice number. It's very easy to get one. But it is still more of a hassle than getting an email address. And most of us do not currently have 7 phone numbers that are just ready to pull out of our pocket and sign up with a service for, another way.
Yep. All right. Let's see if we can get through 2 topics today before we run out of time. Something flew across my desk a few days ago that I wanted to briefly call attention to. Apple Platform Security released, I guess, a series of pages, or maybe it's a PDF, I don't know. But one URL that I can give you is about memory safe iBoot implementation. And I just thought that this was cool. And we don't necessarily need to talk about it a whole lot, but it was something that I thought was very interesting. And on this page, Apple writes, in iOS 14, iPad OS 14, Apple modified the C compiler toolchain used to build the iBoot bootloader to improve its security. The modified toolchain implements code to prevent memory and type safety issues that are typically encountered in C programs. For example, it prevents buffer overflows by ensuring that all pointers carry bounds information that is verified when accessing memory. It prevents heap exploitation by separating heap data from its metadata and accurately detecting error conditions such as double free errors. It prevents type confusion by ensuring that all pointers carry runtime type information that's verified during pointer cast operations. And finally, it prevents type confusion caused by the use after free errors by segregating all dynamic memory allocations by static type. This technology is available on iPhone with Apple A13 Bionic or later an iPad with A14 Bionic chip. I just think this is so cool that, hey, we want to write something in C, but C is inherently a little bit unsafe. So we'll modify the C compiler to make it a little more safe. Please and thank you. I just think that's super, super cool.
So a bunch of discussion from some folks who do low-level programming at Apple and other places about the general topic of C just being, an unsafe language to do any new development in modern times, right? Every time there's some kind of bug or security exploit that comes out, it's just another nail in the coffin of C when it comes to security. Like there was the sudo one recently, that there was this silly bug in the Linux version of sudo that also affected Macs, by the way. It was just straight up normal, rookie C mistake that everybody makes because it's very easy to make them. I forget what it was. It was I think it was just a straight buffer overflow. But anyway, C makes all these things eminently possible, and therefore it's probably not wise to start some new project of something that has security implications in C. And when C was the dominant language, people say, oh yeah, well, it's difficult, whatever, but it's the only choice. It's not the only choice anymore. There are so many memory safe languages, and if your choice is, well, I need to use C because only C gives me the performance I need. If we were to tell you, okay, fine, but 10 years from now, there'll be a terrible security flaw that will infect billions of computers, do you still want to use C? When it was the only choice, there was also this sort of machismo about well, I'm a good C programmer. I won't make those mistakes, right? Or I'll use I have a tool that will help me figure out whether I'm making those mistakes, or the people who do that, there's just the bad C programmers, or there's too much code written by people who don't understand C, and all sorts of excuses. But the bottom line is, history has shown if you're writing any security critical software in C, there will be security-related bugs in your code. There's no way to stop it, no matter how many eyes are on it. If it's open source and everyone's going to look at it and they'll find it. Nope, they didn't find it in whatever was the Heartbleed thing that was in there for years. The sudo one has been in there for years. C is just never going to be a tool that humans can use to make programs that don't have security flaws. And today we have things that are better in that regard. Not perfect, but better. Things like Swift or Rust that don't let you make a lot of the common errors. This memory safe boot implementation C compiler thing is like taking C and trying to mutate it to have a little bit of the memory safety that things like Swift and Rust have, which is a great idea. But you're also kind of changing the language as you do that. And as you start to do that, you're like mutating C into a poorly specified half implementation of Rust or Swift, which is probably not ideal. Now, obviously, you don't have the option in most of these cases to say, I'm just going to rewrite everything in Swift or Rust, because that's you've got a bunch of software in C, you've got to deal with it. The core of Darwin, BSD, Mach, all that stuff, that's C, and there's tons of C++ code. Like, it's not going away anytime soon. But the Twitter discussion I found interesting was general agreement about people who work on this type of code in C all day long at the highest levels, all agreeing that, yeah, this is not, humans will never be able to do this. So we need to just use different languages. There's nothing we can do in terms of discipline and linting and testing that's going to save us. The compiler helping here is great, but it just adds sort of another variable, right? Because there could be parts of this implementation of this, safe C thing that themselves end up being venues for exploits. You really kind of have to build in this type of safety from the very beginning to have a little bit more confidence. So I would say using this compiler is vastly better than not using it. But if given the choice and you're writing some new code that doesn't exist, that's going to be in a security critical area, I'm starting to agree with the notion that C and to a slightly lesser extent C++ are just non-starters and you should really think about using something else.
Yeah, no argument here. The first several years of my professional career were in C++, and there was a brief window of time where I thought I was an okay C++ developer, which just indicates how young I was. I do not miss those times really at all. Like, I am glad that that's how I learned, and I'm glad that was the foundation upon which I started using other languages. But man, I do not miss it. I really don't. All right, Ming-Chi Kuo has some interesting information for us. New MacBook Pro models with HDMI port and SD card reader to launch later this year. Marco, I thought I heard your celebration from all the way down here, several hundred miles below you. Are you okay? Do you need a moment? Do you need a beer to kind of calm you down? Or how are we doing?
We know how Marco always loves to hook up his laptops to the projector so he can present to the room, right?
No, like here's why this is very good news. So, we heard the rumors, I believe also from Ming-Chi Kuo or from Mark Gurman or whoever was reporting it a few weeks back, talking about how the new MacBook Pros were rumored to have a few different improvements that were all like really pretty good fan service improvements, as well as, quote, more ports or more types of ports, more connectivity, however they worded it. But they didn't specify, like, well, what ports? Like, what's going to be added besides the rumor about MagSafe? But, it left the rest of it as an exercise to the reader to speculate. So what's nice about this is that Ming-Chi Kuo, who is pretty well-sourced and pretty reliable with stuff like this, is saying specifically which ports are coming back, in addition to MagSafe, which, again, has many benefits, including just freeing up a USB port. But to have the SD card slot back and the HDMI port back, I will say, I don't think I will ever use the HDMI port on a laptop. However, as I said back when we talked about this a few weeks ago, if you look at what like every single dongle has, everyone, like I don't know anybody who has a MacBook of any kind from 2016 forward, so the USB-C only generation, who doesn't have some kind of multi-port dongle. And you look at what ports are on those as kind of an indication of like what ports do most people need from their laptops that maybe should be on the laptop if possible, like as this is like evidence of that. And they all have the same ports. Ethernet, which, okay, it doesn't really fit anymore. Fine. USB-A, HDMI, and SD card slot. All of them have those things. Because clearly those are very common needs. And we can look at both, just generally the way Apple does things and also the physical side profile of these laptops, and we can say, okay, USB-A might be a stretch. Like, I don't think many of us are expecting that, even though I still would like it if it could fit. I would like to have one USB-A port because you just still frequently need that. But okay, I can understand arguments against that. It is easy enough to get USB-C cables and USB-C peripherals much of the time now. So okay, maybe we can go without that one. Again, Ethernet, many people don't need it anymore, and it doesn't fit on the side. So okay, I can go without that one. But HDMI is so commonly needed that I think it should be there. Even though I don't use it, I think it should be there because so many people need it. And that's an area where the need for it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon because it's so often used for like projectors and stuff like that in workplaces and stuff like that. So, that's a common thing. But also, the HDMI ports on dongles are historically very unreliable. It's really hard to find a good one. That is something that needs to be rock solid for, like, nobody is presenting their presentation on a projector who can tolerate that being flaky. No one is watching a movie on their hotel TV from their laptop who really wants it to be flaky. Like, that really needs to be solid. And it's a tricky thing to get right from dongles, apparently, as we have learned from practice, I guess.
No, it's so true. It's so true. I had bought, I don't know, 3 or 4 of knockoff versions of the Apple USB-C in, HDMI out, USB-A in out dongles. I forget the official name, like or USB-C multi-port adapter or something like that is the official name.
Yeah. And
I'd bought a few knockoffs because the official one is literally like $70 or something like that. It's absurdly expensive.
Oh, and I have one. It sucks.
I have one, and it's fine, but I can tell you that all of the knockoffs that I've tried, and maybe it's just the particular devices I'm using, who knows, maybe I stepped on one or something that I don't remember, but every single one of these knockoffs, it's exactly what you described, Marco, that sometimes if I plug it in the wrong way, the TV will be showing nothing but static. Sometimes if I plug it in the wrong way, it's showing things, but the colors are wrong. Like, it is unbelievable to me that this completely digital, transport mechanism can fail in so many different ways. Not completely fail, mind you, just mostly fail. And I don't understand why this is so difficult. It seems like it should be fairly straightforward, but I guess it ain't. And because of that, the only dongle that I ever use, even though I have literally have the official and 3 or 4 knockoffs, the only one I ever use is the Apple one because it's the only one that reliably works for me. It's ridiculous.
If you can reduce the need for most people to need a dongle at all, that's a huge advantage. And if most people need a dongle, then I think that's a product design failure. It isn't like a case where people put cases on their phones. I mean, that's partially a design failure in that the phones are too breakable, but people also have lots of different preferences for which cases they want and everything else. But a dongle for a laptop means I have a pretty significant need for some kind of ports that this laptop doesn't have. And if everyone bought different kinds of dongles, then you could argue, well, it's good to offer people flexibility because then they can pick what they need. If everyone is using these same 3 ports on their dongles, that needs to be built in if possible. When things are built in, they are inherently more reliable because you're not, everyone's not using some weird $10 no-name chip that all these manufacturers on Amazon that have Markov generator brand names with the same plastic enclosure around it with different things printed on it. And you're okay, well, that might not be very reliable. And compared to the built-in port on the laptop, that is usually 100% reliable. To make a large portion of your customer base rely on dongles is not a great thing. So if everyone is requesting the same 3 ports and you can just build them in, that's great, and you should. And so again, USB-A, I see why, that one's easier to go without. HDMI is, for the people who need it, they need it, period. And if you can build that in, great. That resolves a huge problem that a lot of people have. And SD card slots. This is, again, I've made this argument before, I'll be quick. People who don't use SD cards always think, oh, those are in the past now. You can just use Wi-Fi or whatever. Like everyone always thinks SD cards are not useful anymore if they don't use them. But to the people who use them, we know, oh no, we still need that. If you use SD cards in your workflow, chances are nothing can or will replace that, except at best a future removable card standard like that just, has bigger, faster cards, whatever. But like right now, SD is still like the most mainstream, widely used one. It's supported by the most devices. I know some of the higher end ones are having these like, CFast and like other like faster things, but for the most part, that is still like, if you're going to pick one slot to build in, that's the one to build in. And nothing replaces that over time. Like, it's not like all the cameras now go to Wi-Fi. There's no like sound recorders that record to Wi-Fi. Like it's that never materialized because for lots of good reasons. But like basically SD cards still work really well and are still used in massive numbers of devices and peripherals and specialty workflows that people still need, and that need has not gone away in the last 4.5 years that we've had the USB-C world. So again, build that back in if you can. SD card slots are really small. They can be really thin. So there's no reason that can't fit on a redesigned laptop. So this is great news. I'm so happy to hear this from such a reliable leaker as Ming-Chi Kuo, because this isn't 100% guarantee that's going to happen, but it's a pretty strong signal. So if these laptops are roughly what is rumored, which is some kind of faster M series chip or bigger GPU or whatever it is, somehow expanded M series chip, it probably expanded RAM ceiling for people who need more than 16. Great. Possibly bigger screens, possibly a redesigned enclosure, but the return of MagSafe and HDMI and SD, while hopefully not ruining anything else. Like, no new keyboards, please. Don't mess with too much. Oh, and the alleged departure of the touch bar. This is all great news. I'm looking forward to this. Even if only half of this stuff comes true, this is going to be a great series of products in all likelihood. So I'm really very much looking forward to this year of products.
We've been talking about this for a couple of weeks just because of the way these rumors have been rolling out. Like Marco said, it started off as like, oh, they're going to have new things with new ports. Well, which new ports? And then it's like, oh, one of them's going to be an SD card. And then we talked about that. And this week it was like, oh, and the other one's going to be HDMI. And I feel like we talked about this before, like really straining the limits of how much I'm willing to believe these rumors, because it's just in many ways too good to be true. The selection of ports is interesting because so USB-A, like lots of people have wanted that for a while, but as Marco said, we do actually have USB. It's just the little connector, and that little connector slowly but surely is making inroads. It's not, I know A is still very, very common, I understand, but like unlike some of the other things, the replacement exists and is making steady progress. And USB-A is actually pretty big, right? HDMI, like, obviously, I haven't been in the office in forever. When I was in the office, everyone had one of these stupid dongles to connect up to HDMI, and they're just as reliable as you said. HDMI is interesting because it ties into the form factor rumors. HDMI is too big to fit on the edge of current Apple laptops, but that's only because they have the curve that lets you get your fingers underneath it. If they have flat sides and then rubber feet to bring them off the ground so you can actually pick them up, the flat side is probably going to be there to give it enough room for HDMI, unless it's mini HDMI, which everybody hates and won't actually solve the problem, because now everyone's going to have mini HDMI to regular HDMI adapters. So
right.
This HDMI rumor is really pushing against, I'm just like, not that I don't think they should have it. I'm like, but HDMI, that's big. And that just seems like complete wish fulfillment of like, remember what you complained about in 2016? Well, we're fixing all of those things. And, granted, like I said, this is what we've all been wanting. Fix the keyboard, bring the ports back, do all the things. It'll be awesome when it happens. But in some respects, I'm like, all you're doing is catching back up to where you were in 2015. In some respects. Obviously, the computer's going to be way faster. The screens are better. They're lighter. The battery life is better. Like, it's not exactly the same. But in terms of like the product features and benefits. Oh, it's a laptop. It has a big screen. It has a keyboard, a trackpad, and it has ports on it. It's setting aside the march of technology that allows everything inside there to get better, you're not really making that much progress. You're more or less going back to the last good idea you had, which you should. Don't keep going with the idea that we don't like, right? Good. But it's a little bit depressing when I think about the time that we wasted. Forget about the time we wasted on the butterfly keyboard, just the time that we wasted.
I'll never forget.
Dealing with the insistence on just having Thunderbolt / USB-C ports for everything. Right. And if these rumors turn out to be true and Apple finally does consent to have useful ports on the side of its laptops, whatever they may be, and that they are as welcomed by the customers as we all expect them to be, it's just going to be like so depressing to think about, because during all those years, it was like, well, maybe this is the future and we just have to get used to it or whatever. And we're waiting so long for just USB-C to come around to replace A. And although that is still slowly happening, all the other ports, there's nothing for them. Like it's just, it's dongles or nothing. And so while we still have the ability to fit any of them on there, because SD will fit because it's skinny, Ethernet won't, HDMI might fit if you make that side a lot flatter and bigger, and maybe, on the wedge-shaped computer, you could have the fat side of it or whatever. But I don't know how long, like some of these connectors, I'm not sure how long they're going to last. SD card, I guess it will last for a while, or if they replace it with the one that also reads the whatever the new compact flash standard is that looks like an SD card. That could last for a little while too. And presumably these things would just be on the high-end ones that are made for like pros or whatever, because, who needs this stuff on a lower-end laptop? And on something as skinny as a replacement for the MacBook Adorable, there's no way you're even getting an SD card slot on the side of that thing. So forget about that. But I don't know. Like at this rate, it's been like every week there's a new rumor. Next week is the rumor that they're adding an Ethernet port. Like I don't know what comes next. Like, are they going to add a giant chunky, back to it to fit? Is it micro Ethernet? Does such a thing exist? I don't even know. So hopefully this is the last of the features of the new MacBooks rumors, and the next time we talk about this, it will be about an actual product. But we'll see.
I'd like to enter old man corner, if I may. That's
our entire show.
Yeah, well, touche. When Marco and I were in school, in college, it was unusual, possible but unusual, to find a laptop with built-in wireless. And in fact, it was, particularly at the beginning of college, it was very unusual to find a laptop with built-in Ethernet. You would always find a laptop with a built-in modem, but it was very unusual to find a laptop with built-in Ethernet. And what you often had to do was add, well, especially for us PC users, you would have to add a PCMCIA card, and it was like an expansion card specifically for laptops. And I think cable cards in cable boxes use the same form factor, if I'm not mistaken. But at the time, you would slide this card into the laptop, and then you would often have a little mini dongle coming out of it in order to plug in like your phone jack or your Ethernet cable. And then the magic of XJack appeared. Mm-hmm. And what they ended up doing was there was a little pop out, like not a door necessarily, but a little pop out thing, a receptacle, I guess, wherein you could just plug the phone cable or the Ethernet cable directly into this little receptacle that popped right out of the cord. No dongles required. Guys, kids, it was amazing. And I think I've told this story at least once or twice, and I apologize for repeating it, but it was so unbelievably cool. See also when you had Wi-Fi PCMCIA cards where it had the antenna hanging out the side of the computer, which was often like a solid inch wide. It was so bad. And then I remember I know I've told this story, I got some ThinkPad, I can't remember which one it was, that had a port on the bottom of it where you could slot in a Cisco Wi-Fi card. So it was internal, and it already had the antennas and like the display that I think you had to like hook up or something like that. But I could get on the internet using my laptop without having this wart sticking outside the side of my laptop. Oh my word, kids. It was like a whole new world. It was amazing. So anyway, I'm ready for an XJack MacBook Pro is what I'm saying.
Please don't do that.
Come on, man. It'd be awesome.
Was that the thing that looked like a little like square basketball hoop that looked like it was ready to break at any second?
Yep. Yes, it looks incredibly perilous. Like yeah. I don't know how sturdy they actually were in practice, but it looks like you would just look at it wrong and break it.
No, it's the opposite of MagSafe, where MagSafe, if someone steps over the cord, your laptop will be okay. If someone sneezes on the cord, it's going to snap that thing off.
We are brought to you this week by Squarespace. Start building your website today at squarespace.com/ATP. Enter offer code ATP at checkout to get 10% off. Make your next move with Squarespace. Squarespace makes it incredibly fast and easy and low hassle to make a website, regardless of any of your skill level in making websites. So you can be a web developer or you can be a total novice. With Squarespace, it doesn't matter because there's no coding required. They all have intuitive, easy-to-use tools to do pretty much anything you want to do on Squarespace for all sorts of different sites. Whether it's something simple like, a few pages that, just say like, your business information, the hours of your store or whatever, or whether it's something that is typically more complicated to host, something like hosting an entire podcast or hosting a, dynamic gallery, dynamic event calendar, stuff like that. Squarespace makes it incredibly easy to host all that stuff. You can even host a store on Squarespace. Digital or physical goods can be sold on Squarespace, and it's super easy. It's just an incredible platform to build on. And when Squarespace hosts your site, there's all sorts of things you don't have to worry about. You're not running your own servers. You don't have to worry about like software upgrades and security patches and migrations and all that stuff. You don't have to worry about your getting hacked. You don't have to worry about supporting your site or keeping things running. They do all of that for you. And you can see how easy Squarespace is to use by using their free trial. You can start a site on Squarespace, never giving them a credit card. With their free trial, so that you don't have to remember to cancel it. It doesn't auto bill you. You never give them a credit card. You just start building your site. You can build the entire site before you pay them anything. You can see how it works, and when you're ready to launch, that's when you can sign up. Start that free trial at squarespace.com/ATP. When you decide to sign up, go back there, squarespace.com/ATP, and use the offer code ATP to get 10% off your first purchase. That's squarespace.com/ATP, code ATP. Thank you so much to Squarespace. Make your next move with Squarespace.
Let's do some Ask ATP. John Hovland writes, I have a 2009 iMac running High Sierra, and I've recently learned that Apple plans to discontinue security updates as of the end of January 2021. Sorry, we're not the most timely. My question is, how dangerous is it to continue to operate a Mac under these circumstances while old, the iMac is meeting my needs, and I would prefer to delay a replacement until an Apple Silicon iMac is available? It's a tough spot that John's in. I mean, I would say if it were me, I'd probably still continue to use it and just try not to visit the dark corners of the internet. But I don't know. What do you think, John?
Yeah, there are security flaws in this already. Like just the sudo thing that I mentioned is probably in this High Sierra thing, and it's never going to be patched, right? But if that's the latest OS your Mac can run, it's okay to just ride that out for a little while. You should be planning to eventually replace this computer, but in the grand scheme of things, just because you have security vulnerabilities doesn't mean they'll be exploited. There's more risk than if you had an up-to-date patch version of the OS, but how much more risk? Because even in a patched version of the OS, there are flaws that aren't yet patched or that Apple doesn't yet know about. So it's not as if you're going from, the wrong way to think about this is, previously, I had a secure OS, and now I have an insecure one. You've always had an insecure OS. It's just a question of how many vulnerabilities are there. And as time progresses, High Sierra will gather more vulnerabilities, probably, up to a limit, because eventually no one cares about exploiting it anymore. But I wouldn't characterize it as a sort of binary black and white, I was supported and now I'm not. It's more of this long gradient, and you've been sort of abandoned at the back end of this gradient and things are just going to slowly get worse for you. So start planning on a new Mac, but as someone who has run Macs that could no longer be upgraded to newer versions of operating systems for literal years, it's mostly okay, right? Like I said, don't think about it as running an insecure OS, thinking about it as running an OS that is not getting any better.
Marco, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I would just add that this is probably going to be for a reasonably short time because John says they prefer to just delay replacement until an Apple Silicon iMac is available. That's probably going to be within a few months. So I think it would be. It's not that big of a time that you're in this state. And I would just say, John's right, but I'd just say, once you are no longer being security patched, just be a little extra careful. And I know that's hard to say, just be a little bit careful with weird websites you might visit, like dark corners of the web, try to use a web browser that is more up to date than whatever version of Safari will be in that. So maybe use like Firefox or Chrome or something else that is like if you can get some other browser that is still being updated for that OS. I believe Firefox goes back pretty far, so that could be something. Just because your most likely attack vectors are going to be like weird network stuff, which I will get to in a second, or weird web exploits. So if you can just reduce your attack vector there by using a more up-to-date browser than the built-in Safari, that's probably a good idea. And then for the network side, just make sure that you're not directly connected to the internet. But these days, no one is. Like these days, everyone's going through a router of some kind. So the basic security inherent in being behind a NAT router is going to be largely protecting you from weird network port scanning kind of threats. So you're mostly okay on that. But yeah, just the web browser I think is your biggest attack surface. So try to get better than the built-in stuff for the web browser. And then when the new iMacs come out, jump on them reasonably quickly. But again, I think that's probably going to be within a few months.
And maybe don't install lots of new software, don't download a lot of attachments and double click them to launch them. The way to think about it is whatever was on your computer when it stopped getting patches, just use it in that mode. Like the desire to say, oh, there's a cool new program, I should try it out. Or, just that's where you get yourself into trouble. That's what sort of being slightly more cautious means. But like I said, I ran my 2008 Mac Pro with an OS that was multiple years old. And mostly, I have a certain level of caution I'm always operating with, but it's not the end of the world. And so, we don't know when new iMacs are coming out. We're hoping they're going to be this year, but you're not going to be spending 3 years using this computer. So I wouldn't worry too much about it.
And to put things in perspective, I actually meant to talk about this earlier. Somebody I know who shall remain nameless, they were running Big Sur on their MacBook Pro. I think it's roughly the same vintage as mine. And they noticed that when they were going to do a search in their web browser, and this was true of both Chrome and Safari, which is where this story starts to get alarming, they would do a Google search but end up on Yahoo. The browser settings are for Google, and I verified this myself, but they ended up on Yahoo. And some spelunking later, I realized they had both HTTP and HTTPS proxies in their networking settings that they absolutely did not turn on themselves. And so suffice it to say, that computer has been burnt down and rebuilt from the ground up with no migration assistant, and things are looking better now. But that was on Big Sur. And for the life of me, I have no idea how this individual ended up getting this particular virus or malware or whatever it was. Not a clue. They're not the kind of person I don't think that would be on the darkest of dark corners of the internet or even the particularly gray corners of the internet. So I don't know what happened there, but it can happen to anyone, even on Big Sur.
Well, you click on an ad banner, download a thing, say okay to a bunch of dialogues you don't understand. It can happen. And like I said, one of the things that's protecting your older computer is that it becomes less interesting as an exploit target. Right, yeah. As the installed base, how many people are still running High Sierra? As that installed base shrinks, you become a less interesting target. Even though your thing is not getting any more secure, maybe Big Sur is where all the new action is happening, or all those hot new M1 malware software things.
Yep. All right, Colin Minnie writes, do you store your parents' contacts under their real names, or are they under mom and dad or similar? It's worth noting that there's a nickname field in contacts. When you use it, it seems to take over in all Apple UIs as the one true version of that contact's name. So, for example, if you use mom as your nickname for your mother, then in messages, I'm trying to think of other places, but in I think the phone or in the phone app, in all the places that Apple controls, you won't see Janelle Liss, you'll see mom. And that's fine, but it does kind of take everything over. Also, there's a way, and I forget exactly how to do it other than apparently you can tell Siri, but there's a way to establish relationships, I think through your own contact or perhaps through other contacts where you can say, oh, this person is related to this other person because this is their mother or this is their sister or brother or what have you. So for me, I do have nicknames for my parents. And I think I do have relationships for my immediate family in terms of both Aaron and the immediate family that I grew up with. I think if this started as an email thread that maybe John and I both participated in. So, John, do you have more thoughts about this?
Yeah, my general advice is use the people's real names, put their first name in their first name field, put their last name in the last name field, but then use the nickname field. That's exactly what it's there for. At various times, Apple software has had, like some of it has sometimes had a preference to say, should I show the nickname? Should I show their first name? Should I show the long name? But Apple being Apple, those options are few and far between, and I think have been disappearing over time. But that's what I recommend people do. If you don't see the nickname field in your contacts, if you go edit contact and you don't see a nickname, you have to like scroll down and there's like a thing at the bottom that says add new fields or something. And then you can pick from the fields that you can add. You can pick nickname and it will appear. Like it's there. You might have to dig for it a little bit, but it's like an officially supported field that Apple will honor. There's a bunch of other fields that you can also fill in for relationship stuff, but I don't even know what those things are because the way I've mostly done it is the way that Casey just described. You can have a conversation with Siri about this. And it has all the benefits and drawbacks of having a conversation with Siri, right? So you can just say, hey, Dingus, Jane Doe is my mother and James Doe is my father-in-law. And it will essentially make those relationships for you in your contacts. I think it will just fill in the fields that you could fill in manually, but if you don't know what they are, you can just talk. The downsides of conversations with Siri is that if it misunderstands you or you say the wrong thing, you don't know what Siri just did to establish that relationship. If you didn't know about these secret fields at the bottom of contacts, or you don't know how to show them in the edit or whatever, you're like, how do I fix that? Hey, Dingus, James Doe is not my father. He's my father-in-law. Hey, and it's like, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you're. It's like, oh no, Siri's not a human. It knows. It's like a text adventure. It knows how to understand who is my mom and my dad. But now when I want to say, the thing you just did is not quite right. Can you just undo that and do something different? And it doesn't know. So I'm not sure what the best way to do the relationship stuff is. The way I've had the most success is sort of the demand paged approach where I ask Siri to do a thing for me and it says, I don't know who your father is. Can you tell me who they are? And like sort of that type of thing where I try to do a thing expecting it to know who my wife is, but it doesn't yet know. And it asks me and I answer. And if that works out and I answer correctly, from that point on, it's all set. I think this entire realm of features deserves a better interface than what it has, than, obscure fields at the bottom of contacts that you don't even see unless you add them. Because, and I bet Apple would say, well, that's what Siri's for. We don't want people messing with those fields. It's too fidgety. We just want them to talk to Siri, but Siri's not up to the task a lot of the time, especially if you get it wrong. But anyway, yeah, I recommend using real names everywhere and then just somehow try to get into the system the various relationships. Because once all those relationships are in, you can pretty reliably say, hey, Dingus, call my wife at work, and it will figure out what to do. I mean, even my ancient Honda Accord can do that, that type of thing where I can yell into the air and specify someone by their relationship and specify a location, and it will just do it. So we are at that level of technology that a 2014 Honda can do it. I think Apple can do it as well.
And then Harjus Manga writes, fun fact, when Declan was really little, his word for grandma was manga. And so when one of the moms showed up, it was manga. Anyway, Harjus writes, I'm irrationally annoyed by the non-permanent apps in my dock that stick around after I close all the windows. I don't necessarily want to quit those apps. I don't care if they keep running, but I don't want them cluttering up my dock. I really don't need to be aware that TextEdit is running 3 days after the one time I open a random file with it. Is there a way to auto-hide apps from the dock that have no open windows? Now, I'm not entirely sure that I understand what is being asked here because there's like several different things that this could mean. First of all, in Big Sur, and it might have been even in Catalina before it, there will be, I think, up to 3 recently used apps that will show up on your dock next to the trash, which you can turn off in system preferences. There's a checkbox, show recent applications in dock. And those apps may or may not be running at any given point. And so maybe that's what it's being referred to. Also worth noting, although I don't think this is the question, there used to be little like dots or lights next to apps that were actively running. And then those lights or dots would go away if the app is not actively running right now. This is one of those things that I always turn back on, even though I try to stick to as vanilla in installation in terms of like preferences and things like that as I can. That's show indicators for open applications, again, in dock and menu bar and system preferences. But I think what's actually being asked is if you open an app and then and I guess like it was said, close all the windows, but the app hasn't been terminated. It does still sit in the dock for a while. And I guess to me, like, if that's a problem, just quit the darn app. And obviously that's not the actual solution. That's not fair of me to say, but that's what I do. Like if I have TextEdit open and I close the last window, I'll just Command Q, and then the problem and the icon goes away. But I'm guessing one of you, maybe John, has more or better thoughts about this. So what should be done?
Are those dots really off by default? This is what happens if you never do a clean install. I have no idea what the defaults are anymore.
I am not 100% sure, but I'm close.
I think they're on by default.
Okay, maybe I'm wrong.
All right, so the general complaint here seems like it sounds like the common Windows user complaint, because in Windows, the sort of hierarchy that exists on the Mac doesn't exist in the same way. On the Mac, you have applications, and there's an application that is the front application, and that owns the menu bar. And within that application, you can have multiple windows. And the original Mac model and the Mac model that more or less has stayed since day one, subject to the caveats that I'll get to in a moment, is that an application can be open and running independent of how many windows it has on the screen. And you can tell that it's running because you can look at the menu bar in modern macOS. You can see the name of the app there, right? It's the frontmost application. It owns the menu bar. It's running. Doesn't matter if there are any windows open. Whereas in Windows, the windows themselves more or less are the application. And if you close all the windows by hitting the little X button and they're all gone, well, the app's not running anymore. Because how could the app be running if there are no windows open? Because on Windows, there is no menu bar at the top of the screen. So if you've literally closed all the windows, how would you access the UI of the application? It is not running anymore, right? And that's what Windows users expect. Now on the Mac, there's always been exceptions like desk accessories, which no one knows what those are unless you're super old, or other applications like Calculator, for example, where you close that window and it's like, oh, well, when I close the Calculator desk accessory, the calculator's not running anymore. And desk accessories didn't own the menu bar anyway. So at some point during, I think it was probably in the early days of macOS 10, Apple made it more or less an officially supported thing that, hey, if you have a little application like Calculator, you can make it so that when you close the last window, your application quits. Now, you've always been able to do that on the Mac. It's just a program. You can make your app do anything, but it hasn't been in the culture. Like, especially in classic macOS, the culture was if you have an application and it's launched, and someone closes the last window, like if you have like a text editor open in this example, and someone closes the last open text editor window, you would never quit TextEdit. Of course, you would leave the application running because maybe the person closed it and the next thing they wanted to do is make a new TextEdit document, so they hit Command-N. And if TextEdit quit after you close the last window, how can you hit Command-N? You have to go relaunch it, right? So, and that's the way I'm used to. That's the way Mac culture tends to work. And so this complaint is the opposite of saying, once I close that last TextEdit window, it annoys me that TextEdit sits there still being open, waiting to see if I want to make a new TextEdit window or open a new document in TextEdit. Why doesn't it just quit? I don't have any windows open. In fact, TextEdit specifically is the one app, that and Preview, but TextEdit, these apps drive me up a wall because let me see, what version of it? I think in Lion, macOS 10.7 from 2011, Apple added a feature called automatic termination. And the way that works is you can opt into it. The way it works is if you close all the windows belonging to an application may decide to automatically terminate because it thinks you're not using it anymore after a short period of time. If you use the dock without that recent applications thing, which is a new thing, it didn't exist in Lion anyway, what you'll see then is you'll close the last window for TextEdit, and let's pick Preview. You open a bunch of pictures in Preview. I'm looking at the pictures. All right, no, I don't like that one. I like that one. So I close the window, and I've got no windows open in Preview. Then I go back to the Finder to find the next image I want to open. While I'm in the Finder looking for the next image, Preview quits out from under me and disappears from the dock. And I was like, well, wait, I was just about to go back to you. So now you have to reopen Preview or double-click the image and reopen Preview. Or if the image is owned by Photoshop, manually open Preview and then drag it onto Preview because you don't want the thing to open in Photoshop when you double-click it, which is a whole other ball of wax. I don't like the application quitting behind my back because it thinks I'm done using it based solely on the signal of whether or not it has any windows open. So we have the opposite complaint here, right? That he wants these apps to quit as soon as they have no windows open, and I can't stand when they do that. The other feature that Apple added related to this, again around the same time, is called sudden termination, and I'm pretty sure both of these two things still exist. They're both things that you can opt into. Sudden termination is a way for your application to essentially set a flag or signal to the OS that not only is it okay to terminate me, but you can terminate me with prejudice. You can send me sig kill. Like, you don't have to like politely send me an Apple event asking me to quit. You can just literally just kill me. I don't have any cleanup work to do. I don't have any open files. I don't need to write any preference files. I am ready to be terminated suddenly. And this feature was added, I think, in Snow Leopard, actually, to make it so like when you log out or shut down, that it doesn't have to essentially send a quit Apple event to every single application, have that application swap back in, have it respond to the quit Apple event, have it to run all the handlers that you can run. And, AppKit has handlers for it and Classic Mac has handlers for it. And, like there's things you can do on quit. Clean stuff up, like close your indexes, whatever. Like there's all sorts of crap apps can do on quit. And that would make logout slower or shutdown slower or restart slower because you'd have to wait patiently for every application to be done doing what it's doing. It was especially true on the days of spinning hard disks and not a lot of RAM, when these things would have to swap back in from disk just to get to the point to say, okay, you finally swapped back in. Now process this quit event up. Now you're exiting. And it would just be torture to wait for the thing to come off the disk into RAM just so it could quit itself. Whereas if you allowed the OS, if you had previously signaled, I'm not actually doing anything here, you can kill me, then macOS would just send, I think it would actually literally send sig kill -9, to just kill that process off. Like, no chance to do anything. You don't get to swap back in. You don't get to run again. You're just dead. And then automatic termination is the thing where it says, oh, when no windows are open and you haven't used me in a while, I'm just going to exit. And both of those, you could use them in any combination, right? And then finally, this was in my Lion review. It's a good thing I go back through my old reviews and learn things that I had long since forgotten. I'm not sure if they're still doing this, but one of the things that Lion did was if an application was automatically terminated, it would disappear from your dock if it wasn't like permanently there, or the dot would disappear underneath it. I do wonder how many people understand how the dock works these days, like how, like what makes an icon disappear from the dock when it's quit versus what makes it stay there, right? How does the fact that I dragged an icon one space to the left mean that it's forever on my dock, right? Like, the model hasn't changed in, 16 years, but it is kind of a weird model. Anyway, let's say this thing wasn't permanently on your dock and it was automatically terminated and disappears from your dock. And you're like, oh, that application I was using, you made it quit. The OS, as of Lion anyway, reserved the right to just keep that application running anyway. So you could go to Activity Monitor and you say, wait a second, I thought Preview just quit. I saw it disappear from my dock. Why do I still see Preview in Activity Monitor? Is there some kind of lag or something? No. The OS would terminate Preview, but it wouldn't actually terminate it. It would keep it running just in case you want to launch it again. And you would click to launch it again, and it would be up instantly. This is, again, a lot easier to notice in the days before SSDs. Like, when in the days of spinning disks, you would really notice when you launch an app for real. So it would automatically terminate, in scare quotes, Preview. But it didn't actually terminate. It just hit it from the dock. And so the next time you launched it, it would be like, oh, here I am. I'm still running. You didn't know that. Look, I launched it instantly. I find this entire approach maddening, right? The thing that iOS does, which didn't help, and people still love to force code all their applications, but the thing that iOS does, which is, don't you worry about whether an application is running or not. That's not a thing you have to concern yourself with. The OS will manage all that. As far as you're concerned, running application, not running application, they all look the same in the app switcher. From day one, we've required the applications to be able to resume where they left off and, have autosave and all that stuff. That's the model of iOS. That is a fairly clean model, even if it didn't account for the foibles of human nature that would result in millions of people swiping their applications upward all day long, right? The model on the Mac has never been like that, and attempts to make the Mac like that, like sudden termination, automatic termination, and all the other stuff they did to try to ISify Mac OS back in the Lion days, have not been particularly successful. Whereas the previous model that the Mac had, which is you launch applications, when you're done with them, you quit them. Windows are owned by applications, so you have a bunch of applications, each of which own a bunch of windows. You save explicitly. You can save to save the current thing. You can save as to save in a new name. Like, that whole paradigm, that was also understandable, if not quite as friendly as the iOS model. And I feel like where the Mac is now is in this uncomfortable in-between place where there's a bunch of features of macOS that are trying to give you the benefits of iOS, but failing in various ways. And they're also not configurable enough to let people with differing preferences decide, hey, do you want me to yank preview out from under you because you glance away from it for 1 second? Or do you want preview to always stay running? Now, there are hidden plist keys for a lot of these things. You can disable automatic termination. You might be able to disable sudden termination, or at least there were hidden plist keys for these back in the day. But I've long since given up trying to tweak them, and for all I know, they disappeared in recent OS releases. But these should be, if Apple insists on having these features, they probably need more flexibility in macOS so it behaves the way the user wants it to or expects it to behave. Because the current default behavior is like dependent on whether the app supports automatic termination. And off the top of your head, do you know which applications that you use every day support automatic termination, or do you just have no idea? It's not a great situation.
Thanks to our sponsors this week, Squarespace, Buzzsprout, and Fastmail. And thanks to our members who support us directly. You can go to atp.fm/join to join them. And we will talk to you all next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech podcast so long.
Do you actually know which applications support automatic termination on your Mac? Do you know that this is happening, or is this a non-issue in your life?
I didn't know about the sudden termination thing. I did know about the automatic termination thing, but I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of surprised that, I mean, like, there's areas of Mac OS that seem like common stumbling blocks for people learning Mac OS, or like, you know, common like little sticking points that people just never really understand who aren't like super nerds. And you know, I think like disk image distribution of apps is definitely one of those things. And I think window management, there's certain things about it in application lifecycle management that a lot of people just don't get. It doesn't mesh well with them. And this thing about, like, you know, the difference between an app being quit versus an app having no open windows, I think this trips people up so often and is so counterintuitive to how most people assume their computer will work that I am kind of surprised that it hasn't been changed over time. Like, if you look at the kinds of things that Apple has done that make Mac OS worse in certain ways, but that they do in the name of trying to make it more easily understandable for novices. There is so much low-hanging fruit that they haven't touched, especially like in this area, I think, of window management, application lifecycle management, disk images.
I mean, they tried to. They touched it a lot. They just didn't do a good job. Like, it was constantly, like, every release around this middle period of like the 2011, 2012, 2013, they were changing stuff, tons of stuff related. So it was the whole autosave thing, the reason we got like duplicate menu items and you had to hold down modifier keys to get save as, right?
See, and I think that, by the way, that gets me every single time. Every time I open up an image in preview to like make it a chapter artwork image or something, and I modify the size and I hit, I go to save as, and like, oh, actually, I modified the original. You're welcome. Mm-hmm. I'm just like, that's see, like, again, like it. I'm sure they had the best of intentions, you know, trying to bring the iOS data lifecycle to files on the Mac. But the problem is that when they introduced that, most of society had already been using computers, and most of society was already very familiar with the saving and save as workflows and meanings and behaviors on computers. And so by completely breaking that, I think they caused more confusion than they could have possibly resolved by having moved to that system.
They didn't completely break it. If they completely broken it, they would have been better. They partially broke it. That's what I was getting at with my question of like, do you know which applications support sudden termination? Because the Mac was and continues to be this mixed environment where some apps do that, but some apps don't. Some apps support automatic termination, some apps don't. Some apps have save as, some apps don't. And you'd have to essentially keep an inventory of your head and know, well, text edit and preview work this way because they're simple Apple apps and they're trying to demonstrate good behavior. But BB edit works the other way. But Photoshop works a different way. But all the Microsoft apps work a different way. No one can keep track of that in their head. And if you try to explain to somebody, okay, let me explain to you save and save as or duplicate and whatever or versions or whatever, you can explain that to them, but then they say, okay, but this app works different. How am I supposed to know how this app works? And you'd have to say, yeah, well, some apps work the other way and some apps work this way. You can't even say one is the old way and one is the new way and we're in a transition period, because this transition period has been like 10 years long at this point, right? It's just been left in this inconsistent state where a bunch of sort of flagship simple Apple apps have one behavior. And by the way, you also have apps like Calculator that have the other behavior, or things like iTunes. Like there have been various sort of iLife apps that supported the when you close the main window, the app quits, right, for a little while. But then later on, they didn't support that because they changed in various ways. It's too hard to explain. They never landed on one thing. In the classic days, there was one thing, and it was not a particularly friendly thing, but at least it was consistent. And once you learned open, new, save as, quit, if you learned how the window opening, closing works, the only exception you had to explain was desk accessories, and they were so different because they didn't have a menu bar. It was pretty easy. But now, Calculator, I'm pretty sure I got to launch it to find out. Calculator does have a menu bar, but it also quits when you close the calculator window. Like trying to explain this to a new Mac user, and believe it or not, every day someone who's born who's never used the Mac, it's impossible. Whereas iOS has worked this particular way since day one, and even though they've added multitasking, added background tasks and all that other stuff, and it's gotten more complicated, it's way easier to explain the paradigm of iOS, especially on the iPhone, than it is to explain the stuff on the Mac. So if I was still writing macOS 10 reviews, I would probably still be complaining about this stuff, despite the fact that I complained about these exact issues 10 years ago. They haven't been solved. And so those of us who have Macs just muddle through. That's why I was asking, how do you deal with this in your daily life? Do you just have a memorized list in your head of which applications behave in which ways? Or are you surprised every time you go up to the file menu about what you see there and which modifier keys you might have to hold down to get the options you want?
I mean, like for me, like I think I haven't. It's one of those things where, like, if you ask somebody what the keyboard command is for something they do all the time, it's kind of hard for them to tell you because it's just by feel. But I think the normal behavior of this is apps that are not document window based are like Calculator, for instance. Like, you're not supposed to open Calculator and hit Command N to open up a new calculator and then have multiple calculators on screen sometimes. Like, it's just a single window app. So I think apps that are not document-based are supposed to quit when their only window is closed, but apps that are document-based that have the potential to have multiple document windows open at the same time are not supposed to quit when their last document is closed. But that, to me, like this, so I'm pretty sure that's like the standard, and I'm pretty sure that's what most apps do. But it's not,
because preview and text edit both quit when you close the last window. Eventually. And it's because Apple was trying to, at one point, say, hey, everybody's app should do this, right? Like, there's one part of the HIG that says, oh, yeah, if you've got a calculator app, it should totally quit when you close that window. It's a particular mode that you can operate in. And it makes sense. I'm not arguing against that. Like, they're just the modern version of desk accessories. It's a little bit confusing because they have menu bars, but so what? It makes sense. But the text edit thing was like, well, we want to make it like the whole thing with the dots that Casey was getting at. The whole point of that, this is also straight out of one of my old reviews, is that they wanted to do the iOS thing where you don't know whether an application is running or not. And the best way to do that is, hey, previously for all these years, we've had dots underneath, and the ones with dots are running and the ones without dots aren't running. What if we just take away the dots? It's like iOS now, isn't it? And the answer is no, it's not like iOS at all, because iOS has every single app in iOS has the ability to auto-save when you leave it and pick up where it left off when you relaunch it. And pretty much no apps in macOS do that. I mean, maybe BB Edit and maybe a few other exceptional apps that are really good about state preservation, like web browsers. But in general, that's not the way macOS works. So no amount of yanking the dots out from under us or having the applications quit, but not really quit, but not, like, it's just so confusing that it's hard to even keep track of all the different things that different apps are doing. And over time, it has not converged. there has been no consensus. Applications continue just to do what they feel like doing, to the point where, I mean, we've talked about this before, like hold down Command Q to quit Chrome. Why? That's what Chrome felt like doing. People are accidentally quitting it, and it's damaging if you accidentally quit and you don't have the preference set to restore your session the way it was before, which is not the default in Chrome. And so we get a little overlay that says hold down Command Q to quit. That's just trying to explain how the Mac works to someone who hasn't been using it for a few decades is extremely difficult and frustrating. And the solution is not just let's make the Mac like iOS, but the solution is also not to just leave it in its current state, because it's kind of a mess.
You know, when I started using the Mac, which was roughly 08, it was different enough from Windows that it was very frustrating at first, but it was knowable. And, oh, what do you mean the mail is still open when I close the last window? Like, that's dumb. Why would I want to do that? Well, as it turns out, you don't necessarily want to have any mail windows open when you're not actually reading your mail, but you probably still want it in the background checking for mail. So guess what? You can close the last window and it's still there, still checking. Oh, okay, this makes sense. I like it. But now, to y'all's point, it's not knowable. I mean, it is knowable, but it's not effectively knowable. And it's
not obvious, I think.
That's a better word for it. It's not obvious. Like, I think it is knowable, but it is certainly not obvious. And even early on, like, okay, well, how do I know if an app is running or not? Because this, mail is always in my dock. Well, there's that little dot, or that little, I think early on it was a light, like I'd said earlier. There's that little light. And if the light is on, that means mail is running. And if the light is gone, that means mail is not running. Oh, okay. That's a little wonky, but I can get behind this. And it was pretty straightforward. And now it is neither obvious nor straightforward. And that's really unfortunate.